The Demon Sword Master of Excalibur Academy, Volume 8, Chapter 1, Duke Crystalia. The azure hold floated over the seas, casting its massive shadow upon the raging waves. And hovering in the empty air above the Dragon Lord's stronghold was a man. A white-haired hero, clad in military uniform, his hawk-like, ice-blue eyes glaring down at Leonis and Vra, who stood on the remains of the Leviathan. Why would this man be here? Leonis scowled because he recognized this man. He'd seen a picture of him in the estate amid the ruins of the Third Assault Garden. Edward Ray Crystalia, Ryselia's dad, who had supposedly perished in battle with the Voids. Isn't her father dead? More importantly, why is he here? Questions filled Leonis's mind, but he couldn't conjure any answers. I'm surprised you have the nerve to show yourself before me again. The Crimson Dragon beside Leonis snarled. You have courage. I grant you that much. Vra's furious roar shook the air violently. But the man floating above didn't seem at all troubled by the palpable waves of a Dark Lord's fury beating against him. Was he the one who mentally dominated Vra? Even if the Dragon Lord was careless, no ordinary human could control a Dark Lord's mind. What is he? Just who is Duke Crystalia? Leonis cautiously observed the man overhead. So you've returned, Vra Greater Dragon. How fortuitous. The man resembling Duke Crystalia eyed the Dragon Lord coldly. Then he pointed an index finger at a spot between her eyes. Holy Sword, Wheel of Fortune. Activate. Light gathered at his fingertip. Vra. Leonis exclaimed. The same trick again? You underestimate the Dragon Lord. Incandescent, white-hot flames issued from Vra's maw, becoming a surging blade of heat. Boosh! The air trembled. The flame swallowed the man in an instant and then went on to incinerate the walls of the azure hold behind him. Oh, did I reduce him to ashes? Fool, show some restraint. There's much we need to ask him. Leonis shouted, and then crack, ? Leonis heard cracking glass. It's you who underestimates me, Dragon Lord. A fissure ran through the space before the pair of Dark Lords, and the man appeared from within, unharmed. His expression was composed, and there wasn't a single burn on his uniform. Gravity type, 8th order spell, Vrzaga. The man suddenly chanted a spell. Did he just choose sorcery? Leonis quickly formed a tower shield from his shadow. Room, a lump of gravity, akin to that of a giant planet, hit Vra directly. An 8th order gravity spell. Leonis pondered calmly behind his shield. As far as Leonis knew, the ancient, powerful ways of magic were an unknown art in this era. Even 1,000 years ago, ordinary humans could manage only 5th order sorcery at most. Yet this man, Duke Crystalia, employed the highest levels of magic. Vra let out a savage howl, easily shaking off the gravity well enveloping her. The Dragon Lord's scales had an inherent resistance to sorcery, and even a powerful, 8th order spell could manage only to stall her. Vra raged, her golden eyes glinting threateningly as she opened her jaws. I'll tear your throat out, she growled. Vra, wait, let me speak to him, Leonis called. Then he returned his attention to the strange man. You wear the form of a human and yet weave the power of a bygone age. Just who are you? The sharp, ice-blue eyes examined Leonis as though only noticing him for the first time. That's the uniform of a holy swordsman. The 7th Assault Garden. The man muttered. A minion of the Dragon Lord? Do you wear the form of a child to lull your opponents into a sense of carelessness? Leonis remained silent. It seemed the person resembling Duke Crystalia was yet ignorant of Leonis's true identity, and there's no reason to relinquish that information. However, he was familiar with the 7th Assault Garden, which meant he was definitely a person of this era. Was he truly Ryselia's father? I know you, Duke Edward Crystalia, Leonis stated. Beating around the bush was unbecoming of the undead king. He hoped to strike at the heart of the matter and shake up his adversary, aiming to glean information from his reaction. The man's expression didn't change much, but his keen glare narrowed somewhat. So you know me. That is not so unusual. Refugees from outside the city might be unfamiliar with me, but many people know my face. Leonis nodded. Yes, I imagine you are regarded as a hero of humanity, after all. However, the fact you draw breath is not well known. is it? 6 years ago, Duke Crystalia had died in battle against the Voids. Ryzelia told Leonis that the rescue unit had failed to recover her father's body. A stampede left little remaining in its wake, so that wasn't too unusual. However, there was one element that had left Leonis puzzled. In the ruins of the Third Assault Garden, Leonis had gathered the ghosts of the Crystalia Knights under his command, but Duke Crystalia's spirit had been conspicuously absent. Leonis wasn't the sort to overlook the soul of a great hero. Was this man he now faced truly Duke Crystalia himself, or perhaps? Indeed, I was recorded as a casualty. The man resembling Ryzelia's further replied indifferently. Who are you? Leonis questioned. Are you the real Duke Crystalia? That's a question without an answer. I am he. And at the same time, he is I. Nonsense. Leonis spat out in annoyance. If you won't answer, I'll simply force the truth from you. Hey, he's my prey. Vra interjected. I see, but unfortunately, I have something to ask of you as well. The man pointed his finger at Leonis. Dominate, Wheel of Fortune. His ring-shaped holy sword shone once again. Before Duke Crystalia could manifest his holy sword, his arm suddenly flew through the air. A blade of transparent water had cleaved it off. Duke Crystalia whirled around to find a beautiful girl with cold, calm eyes standing atop the raging water. She stood cloaked in a watery raiment, her hair the color of amethyst. Rive's deep sea. The man regarded her with eyes wide. So you escaped the fate woven for you by the Wheel of Fortune. Seizing control of my mind is the height of arrogance. She was expressionless, and her tone was hushed, but rage surged in her eyes. Rives extended an arm and declared, you will pay for that crime with your life. Boosh! A massive cyclone rose from the ocean, loosing a flurry of liquid blades. Vra chanted a spell in dragon tongue. Draconic light armor, Grius Lake, conjuring a barrier around herself. They couldn't afford to get caught in the crossfire here. Leonis jumped for cover inside the Dragon Lord's shield. Duke Crystalia evaded the volley with poise. However, upon seeing the cyclone of water that extended up to the sky destroy part of the Azure Hold, he frowned. Challenging two Dark Lords to battle would place me at a disadvantage, he whispered, eyes flitting to his missing right arm for a moment. I already have what I need. Crack, crack, crack. A gigantic fissure centered upon the Azure Hold ran through the air. What? Leonis could scarcely believe what he saw. Cracks in space heralded the arrival of the Voids. The Azure Hold. What is this? Vra demanded. You know nothing of this ruin. Dragon Lord, Duke Crystalia said. What? This structure is the original template of the human cities, a gate with which to reach the stars. Crack, crack, crack. The tear consumed all around it. The Leviathan in the water began to vanish into the breach. Dark Lords, you cannot escape the fate chosen by my goddess. So saying, the man with Duke Crystalia's countenance disappeared into the spatial rift. Goddess, did he just say goddess? Leonis cried. A memory flashed in his mind. One of the goddess of rebellion, Roselia Ishtaris. He knew only one who ever called her my goddess. You're the only Dark Lord who lacked a body of his own, who existed by possessing vessels. A Dark Lord who originated from beyond this dimension and was capable of opening gates to other worlds. Azrael, the devil of the underworld. The moment Leonis intoned the name, shatter, the world broke apart like fractured glass. Chapter 2. Shari the Body Double. A boat bobbed along a foggy lake. Ryzelia sat in the little vessel, clad in a white dress. With her was Leonis, wearing his Excalibur Academy uniform. Birds chirped from somewhere beyond the misty shore. Elio. Ryzelia, cheeks flushed, cast an upturned look at the boy sitting opposite her. What is it, Miss Celia? He replied while rowing. I want a reward, Ryzelia admitted in a bashful yet coaxing tone. Leonis smiled teasingly. You're being indecent, Miss Celia. Aren't you a noble's daughter? The girl's face reddened at the comment. Do you want it that badly? Leonis reached out and twined a silver strand of hair around his finger. Why yes. Leonis's oddly bullyish attitude was a bit different from how he usually acted, and for some reason, it made Ryzelia's heart beat faster. However, she sensed something a bit off, too. Did Leo always talk like this? He also appeared taller. It was difficult to tell because they were seated, but he looked to be the same height as Rizelia. Is it because he's a growing boy? Leonis gently placed his finger on her lips. Leo. Rizelia's eyes grew blank. She began to lick his fingertip. No, you don't have permission yet, huh? You need to be good and ask for it. Leo, please don't be mean. She lapped at the digit touching her lips. Hey, what am I going to do with you? Fine. Go ahead. She bit down on his finger. Leonis grimaced slightly at the sweet, gentle pain. Leo ma hey. Miss Celia? A single finger just wasn't enough. Caught in a daze, Rizelia pushed Leonis down on the shaking boat and sank her fangs into his throat. Hee. You're not getting away. Leo, Miss Celia, you're acting strange. Miss Celia, listen to me. Leonis thrashed, ultimately capsizing the boat. Bonk. Oh ow. There was a blunt thud. Rizelia cradled her head with both hands while groaning in pain. Geez. What are you doing, Leo, huh? Rizelia rubbed her bleary eyes, realizing she was wearing pajamas. Morning light broke through the curtains, illuminating her argent locks. Her ice blue eyes were still half closed. A pillow rested on her lap, riddled with bite marks, some of which had torn out the stuffing. Rizelia sat up and looked around. She wasn't in a lake surrounded by the woods, nor was there any boat in sight. This was a hotel room, and she was sitting on the floor next to a bed with messy sheets. My word, just what kind of dream were you having? An exasperated voice criticized her from above. Rizelia looked up, flustered, and saw Leonis glaring down at her coldly. Leo. Good morning. Good grief. You're still half asleep. Leonis leaned in, pinching the girl hard on the cheek, which did serve to chase away the drowsiness. It's not even 4 in the morning yet. Rizelia protested as she stood to change from her wrinkled pajamas. We have morning training. Don your training gear. Training? My master ordered me to make you stronger, Leonis stated, bowing his head courteously. The person Rizelia was speaking to wasn't the real Leonis. It was one of his minions acting as his double. It wasn't unusual for Leonis to use imposters to skip lectures at the academy, but in most instances, he sent disguised skeleton soldiers in his stead. This Leonis, however, was someone different. But still, 4 in the morning is too early. Unlike my master, I have no intention of coddling you. If you ask me, he's sweet with you. Sweeter than sugar donuts. Donuts? Rizelia blinked at this odd choice of analogy. Hurry up and get changed. Fine. Rizelia had no choice but to obey the false Leonis's oddly strict orders. As the elevator descended, its window offered a view of the capital's morning scenery. The Shangri-La resort stood deserted, its liveliness from the prior evening feeling like a lie. Rizelia placed a hand on the glass while peering out to sea. Leo, the real Leonis, had departed last night to help that girl with the flaming hair, his so-called comrade. And though he promised to return as soon as possible, he also said he might not make it to the Holy Sword Dance Festival in time. You're okay out there, right, Leo? Rizelia was fine with him not returning in time for the festival, but she still worried about his safety. She'd given him the go-ahead. It had been the right thing to do, but that didn't make the worry any easier to manage. The girl looked away, biting her lip. From the hotel lobby, the two made their way to the Shangri-La Resort's natural park. Rizelia gazed at Leonis's body doubles back while walking. What is it? He suddenly turned around, startling Rizelia. You were staring at me, weren't you? Why yeah. Rizelia nodded hurriedly. Did he have eyes in the back of his head? I was just wondering about your name. I'll call you Leo with the others. Of course, but what about when it's just the two of us? Should I stick to Leo, or do you have a real name? Leonis's replacement gestured pensively. In truth, I feel that referring to our master by such a nickname is frivolous of you. However, since since he allows it, I suppose I shall accept it as well. Okay, let's do our best to get along, Leo. Leonis furrowed his brow in displeasure. That aside, I'd still like to know your real name, Rizelia added. Why? My real name is of no consequence. Ryzelia wouldn't be deterred. That's not true. You're different from the bone soldiers Leo summons all the time. Right? I'm not a skeleton. No, Leonis answered, looking offended by the implication. Right. That's good. If there were any more skellies around, I wouldn't be able to tell you apart. Leonis often summoned undead to help with Ryzelia's training, but since they were all jumbled up bones, she couldn't tell which was which. It was very confusing. Leonis stopped in his tracks and pulled a face. You can't tell skeleton soldiers apart? No. Well, sometimes I can, Ryzelia said, holding up an index finger. The strongest ones are Amylus, Darug, and Nephizgal, and the one that's kind of yellow is the sniper, Zlua. The one with the big crack is the death sword fighter Phaidon, and the one with the twisted arm is Grey Forza. The one with the dented skeleton is the dark priest Mirador, and the lady skeleton is, wait, hold on just a minute. Leonis interjected, you really remember the names and characteristics of all the skeletons? Of course. They're my teachers, after all. Ryzelia nodded, as if to confirm that much was obvious. Leonis was stunned. I'll remember your name, too, so tell me. I am not telling. Oh, come on. It totally felt like you were going to. If, and only if, the day comes when I acknowledge your worth, I will tell you my name. Leonis, actually Shari, then mumbled that such a time would never arrive, and she averted her gaze. Upon reaching the entrance to the natural park, she immediately ordered 5 laps around the park. What, that's all? Ryzelia asked, disappointed. The park's outer circumference was 2 kilorals in length. It wasn't much of a distance. Even Excalibur Academy's basic training was more severe, and Ryzelia had an undead body. You will have to wear this, though. Shari snapped her fingers, and the shadow at Ryzelia's feet began to writhe. What? Ryzelia cried as darkness crept up her body, binding her legs and hands. Heavy. I turned your own shadow into weights to restrict you. Weights? When Ryzelia looked down, she recognized that her shadow had thinned slightly. A moment later, the darkness fettering her limbs turned transparent, blending in with her skin. You will spend a time leading up to the Holy Sword Dance Festival bound as you are now, Shari stated. But I can't run properly like this. If you put your vampire mana to good use, you will get used to it before long. Get used to it? But what about when I sleep, or take a bath? You will tend to your daily needs with them on. Of course. No way. Ryzelia Crystalia, I was ordered to train you as my law, the master's proxy. I am simply abiding by that command. Leonis produced a shadow whip in his hand. A whip. Ryzelia had a bad feeling about this. Now, hurry up and get to running. Crack. Oh, okay. Ryzelia bolted off, spurred by the sharp noise of the whip against the ground. A wooden sword cut through the air, whistling. Sakuya stood in the park by the hotel. Swinging practice was part of her daily routine. When she trained in the woods behind the Resvulgra dorm, she manifested her holy sword, Reikiramayu. But using holy swords outside Excalibur Academy premises was strictly forbidden. Sakuya didn't normally care much for these rules, but Elfine was the one who'd set the 18th platoon up with a private hotel floor, and Sakuya didn't want to cause trouble for her. I shouldn't drag her name through the mud. She brought her wooden sword down again, then stopped. Her eyes peered ahead while she pictured a girl who shared her facial features. Sechira. Sakuya's older sister was thought to have died 9 years ago during the Sigara Orchid's destruction, yet she was alive. She'd returned from the dead. And tried to claim Sakuya's, her younger sister's, life. She wasn't a fake. There's no doubting it. That was really Sechira. The image of Sechira's cold, sagacious eyes had been burned into Sakuya's mind. Sechira had released the Sigara Orchid guardian deity sealed within the 7th Assault Garden's mana furnace and summoned the very Void Lord who'd destroyed her homeland. Why had she returned from the dead? What did she seek to achieve? Sakuya returned her attention to the top of her wooden sword. Training was about more than the Holy Sword Dance Festival, which was only days away. She was bound to lock blades with her sister again. I can't beat her. Not yet. Cold sweat ran down Sakuya's neck. Despite all attempts, she couldn't envision defeating her older sister. Her left eye throbbed painfully from behind its eye patch. the mystic eye of time, granted to her by the man who called himself a Dark Lord. Sakuya couldn't take off the eye patch yet. If she did, the mystic eye's power would start eating away at her. I can't beat Sephira without mastering the power of this gift. Sakuya relaxed her muscles and leaned the wooden sword against a tree. No sooner had she done so, however, than a sound from the bushes set her on edge. Sakuya turned and saw a large black hound emerge from the bushes. "Oh, Fluffy, want some snacks?" Fluffy hesitated for only a moment, barking in reply. Sakuya offered a roasted rice cracker from her sleeve, which the dog accepted gladly. Sakuya smiled and scratched Fluffy's head. Hey, you're as fluffy as ever, Fluffy. Woof, do you like it here? You're just like the first Fluffy the Black. The original Fluffy the Black was a combat hound raised by the Sakura Orchid royal family to guard the princess priestesses. Sakuya and Sephira cherished Fluffy the Black when they were young, but the animal perished with so many others on that awful day 9 years ago. Sakuya scratched and patted the dog, seeing her old one's likeness in him. "Is that Miss Celia?" Sakuya wondered aloud after spotting a silver-haired young woman desperately circumnavigating the park. "Early morning training, huh? Quite admirable." "Lady Celia, what's wrong?" Regina's eyes were wide in shock when Rizelia returned to the hotel. Despite appearing like a secluded noble lady, Rizelia subjected herself to rigorous exercise. As a result, her stamina exceeded that of most other academy students. Yet now Rizelia was wholly worn out. She'd collapsed upon the table after dragging herself to the meeting room. It was quite unusual to see a dignified duke's daughter act so improperly. "Hey, are you all right? Have some water." Regina offered a glass and patted her mistress on the back. "Why yes, I'm fine. I'm just a little tired from my early morning training, is all." "You were out exercising this early?" Regina frowned. "But we're going to be training after this, too." "Yeah, it's just, Leo, good morning, Miss Regina." The boy greeted her as he entered the room. Good morning, kid," Regina answered. Leaning close to him, she whispered, "Say, kid, Lady Celia's acting all weird. Did you do something to her?" Leonis looked away awkwardly. I might have been a bit harsh when I trained her." After a short while, Elfine and Sakuya arrived, and the morning meeting commenced. Holding a discussion during breakfast was the 18th platoon's tradition. Its members had partaken of the hotel restaurant's buffet on their first day here, but this time, Regina had prepared a meal in the common room kitchen using ingredients purchased from the city. She'd made her own special pizza recipe with tomato slices, onions, large pieces of ham, and melted cheese, all baked to a crisp in the oven. To go with it, she'd also prepared white fish soup, salad with roasted walnuts, and yogurt with homemade plum jam she'd brought from the Hresvugra dorm. "Ms. Regina, can I have some more?" Leonis asked with glittering eyes after stuffing his cheeks with Regina's pizza. "Eat up." "Wow, you've got a healthy appetite today, kid." I do." Elfine giggled and smiled at him. "Maybe you've hit a growth spurt. Here, have some coffee." "Thank you." Leonis accepted the mug and sipped its contents. PFFF. Cough, cough. Leonis choked on his coffee. It's bitter," he exclaimed, "but we put in lots of sugar, as always." "Huh? Why yeah, you did." Leonis nodded evasively, shoveling yogurt into his mouth to cleanse his palate. "I guess filling in for the real thing is a bit difficult." Rizelia watched the imposter, feeling a bit nervous. Once everyone was settled, the platoon began their meeting. This year's Holy Sword Dance Festival will be held on the 8th Assault Garden, which is still under construction, Elfine said, displaying an image on her terminal's monitor. The 8th Assault Garden, Nebulous, was a new city under construction at the capital. It was roughly 78% complete, and was coupled to the industrial area's new Float 7. Once complete, Nebulous would be part of the Assault Garden Strike Force, led by the 7th Assault Garden. It would engage in large-scale void eradication missions. It may have been chosen as the event site to serve as a demonstration for immigrating citizens, Elfine speculated, tapping on the terminal. I suppose it'll be a lot like the urban combat training the senior students have in their curriculums, Rizelia commented. Excalibur Academy's urban combat training used real city environments in the 7th Assault Garden. Elfine was the only senior in the 18th platoon and thus the only one in the group privy to this training. However, all the girls had experience with urban warfare from the previous stampedes. Elfine nodded. The rules will be based on the typical urban training team bouts. Finding core flags placed around the area will be the best way to get points. Of course, just like in ordinary matches, destroying an opponent's holy sword or knocking them out of commission helps us score too. What about our initial positioning? Sakuya inquired. We don't have to worry about protecting a base this time. Each unit will be deployed to one of the 8th Assault Gardens areas randomly and will need to gather information while collecting core flags. Regardless of our initial position, we won't know where the other squads are. Well, our platoon has the edge when it comes to intelligence, thanks to your holy sword, Miss Fine. True, but other groups have scanner-type holy swords, too. Elfine called up data about the other platoon's representatives on her terminal. Humanity had established 6 facilities that trained holy swordsmen, including Excalibur Academy, the capital's Elysian Academy, the 5th Assault Gardens Anti-Void Research Institute, the 4th Assault Gardens Academia, the 2nd Assault Gardens Military Instruction School, and the Human Church's St. Illumina's Monastery. Elfine's data included information on each school's representatives, but it consisted only of public information. There'd be no way of knowing how strong the representatives were until seeing them in action. For example, Rizelia had only recently awakened to her holy sword, and Leonie's was a newcomer, so most others didn't have a grasp of their abilities. In all likelihood, other participants were wariest of Sakuya, who had held the record for slaying large voids since she was a young girl. Lady Chatters is as overwhelming as ever, Rizelia whispered while looking at the terminal screen. Chatters Ray Oldries, one of Elysian Academy's representatives, the 3rd princess of the Empire, was considered the strongest holy swordswoman among all students. Her abilities went beyond her powers. She was also a skilled commander and highly trusted by her platoon. We're not going to lose. Let's do this, Rizelia said. Despite the many formidable opponents, everyone in the room nodded. The Central Garden, the capital, located at its core, was the very symbol of the human integrated empire, the palace. This brickwork fortress, built in the style of the old kingdoms, gave the impression that it had gone untouched by the Magitech revolution. Since it was essentially a garrison, it was surrounded by a vast forest and gardens. The palace alone covered an area roughly half that of Excalibur Academy. Gardens within the woods surrounding the structure were open to the public. His villa was nestled within the palace's premises. Oh my, I wasn't expecting guests today. The man, who was tending to a decorative plant, faced the door, sensing that someone had arrived. I'm surprised you noticed me, Your Highness. A half-transparent woman materialized before the closed door. She was clad in a researcher's lab coat and had beautiful black hair. This woman, a senior research officer for the Fillet Company, had an espionage-type holy sword that allowed her to reduce her presence to nothing. Ah, it's you, Clauvia. I suppose I can't scold the guards for letting someone get past them. Then, the Emperor's younger brother and second in the line of succession, Alexios Ray Oldries, greeted his unexpected guest casually. The man in his mid-30s possessed delicate features. He was tall, slender, and appeared quite unreliable, despite being the younger sibling of the most powerful person in the Empire. I have a report regarding that matter, Your Highness, Clauvia whispered. Alexios's face suddenly became quite serious. Did you find something? It's observation data from Alexandria's Research Institute. An unidentified gigantic mass was detected moving at high speeds over the ocean 2,500 kilorals to the south. The institute presumes it's a gigantic void, but the details are inconclusive. It seemed to be en route to the capital for a while, but the observation tools lost sight of it halfway through. It's believed to have moved out of the region where it was first detected. You think it was a Dark Lord? In all likelihood. Clauvia nodded. Its gigantic mass and how it moved across the sea means it's probably the Dark Lord that reigned over the ocean. Yes, the one said to rule the ancient world's seas, the destroyer of 12 oceanic kingdoms. So another Dark Lord has appeared. Perhaps it was roused by tectonic movements on the seabed. Then again, someone may have purposefully awoken it. We don't know. At the very least, we believe its activity isn't connected to the voids, unlike the one we discovered in the tundra. That's a stroke of luck. Losing our trump card, the Dragon Lord, was a painful blow. Alexios shrugged and stroked the decorative plant's leaves. It seems the prophecy Duke Edward Crystallia left behind was true after all. The Dark Lords, the life forms that dominated the world 1,000 years ago, are returning. The Dark Lords were fiction reserved for fairy tales. Duke Crystallia, Alexios's sworn friend, had spent his life pursuing evidence of the Dark Lord's existence. He'd proposed wielding their destructive power to defeat the voids. Over time, this came to be known as the Dark Lord Project. For all their power, the Dark Lords were enemies of humanity, and the method of controlling them was still in the early stages. Most of the supposed 8 Dark Lords yet remained a mystery, too. One thing was certain, though: the immensely powerful Dark Lords did exist. The Dragon Lord, the Lord of the Seas. Then the next one to rise should be the Undead King. The Undead King was the most feared of the Dark Lords, so much so that ancient peoples were scared to speak of him. This was stated in Duke Crystallia's posthumous manuscripts. It was said that the Undead King blighted the earth and employed the dead, resurrecting the departed in blasphemous forms. Raising the dead, was anyone, Dark Lord or not, genuinely capable of that? Either way, it's ironic. The Dark Lords might become Arcane's greatest hope. Alexios whispered, gazing into the distance. The Empire's third princess, Chatters Rayoldries, suddenly stopped in her tracks. She'd been wandering the palace gardens. Her eyes took on a dangerous glint, and she raised her fair eyebrows. She'd just spotted a woman walk out of her uncle's mansion. That Fillet Vixen is trying to curry favor with Uncle Alexios again, is she? Rumors whispered that this woman, Clauvia Fillet, was her uncle's lover, and Chatters believed them. How unsightly. And Uncle Alexios is no better. This fastidious young woman, driven by a pure sense of justice, couldn't bear to see this. Did something happen, Chatters? A lovely voice asked her, concerned. Oh, my apologies, Altaria. It's nothing. Chatters turned around, donning a gentle smile. Altaria was pinching the sleeve of Chatters's uniform and looking up at her older sister. Her hair shone like gold, and her eyes were green like her siblings. Altaria Rayoldries was the Empire's 4th princess. Really? You looked a bit scary. My little sister is a shrewd, observant one, isn't she? Impressed by Altaria's intuition, Chatters took a moment to compose herself better. Whenever she interacted with Altaria, she had to play the ideal older sister. She couldn't show her displeasure at the presence of their uncle's lover. There were other reasons for her foul mood, however. Reporters had disturbed the siblings' long overdue lunch date earlier. With the Holy Sword Dance Festival right around the corner, the media was dying to wring an interview out of Chatters, last year's champion. At first, Chatters responded to the inquiries politely, believing that was her duty as the winner. But reporters had pressed their advantage over the last few days, asking more intimate questions. It was intolerable. And while Chatters wanted nothing more than to blow them away with her holy sword, she had to maintain appearances as a princess of the Empire. Chatters knew this. Of course, she was widely regarded as the best on her team and the strongest holy swordswoman among all the students. There was no denying that her beauty stood well above the norm as well. For someone like that to command so much attention was to be expected. However, she could not help but take offense at how reporters pestered her for comments on Rizelia Crystallia's participation in this year's Holy Sword Dance Festival. She was the daughter of Duke Crystallia, a hero, and was one of the few survivors of the Third Assault Garden's destruction. Those qualities and her unusual awakening to the power of her holy sword set her apart. She was the kind of idol the media lapped up. However, Chatters had little interest in the girl. She bore no ill will for Rizelia Crystallia. Still, She did feel that a special entry brought in solely to drum up attention could only amount to so much. Ultimately, Chatters decided that she would turn down any new requests for interviews. Time spent with my younger sister is far too precious to be wasted on such frivolities. She placed a hand on Altaria's head. Maybe I dote on her too much. Yet who could blame me, with her being so sweet? Watching Altaria grin reminded Chatters that she supposedly had another younger sister. The princess had learned of this only a few years ago. This other sibling was treated as having never existed under an agreement between the royal family and the human church. Soon after her birth, she was handed over to some noble who adopted and raised her. She must be 15 by now. Despite being her older sister, Chatters had been powerless to help that unknown girl. Of course, Chatters was a child at the time, but she still regretted allowing it to happen. I can only hope she knew a happy life. Chatters. Stop, you're treating me like a child. Oh, my apologies. Chatters gave an apologetic smile and took her hand off Altaria's head. I should be going. My subordinates are waiting. Oh, okay. The two of them walked through the garden together. I look forward to seeing you perform at the festival, Altaria remarked. Chatters nodded, brimming with confidence. Yes, you should watch from the best seat available. My holy sword will reign supreme. Altaria suddenly hung her head awkwardly. Oh, what's wrong? Chatters inquired. I was just wondering. Chatters. Will you be fighting Sir Leonis? Altaria asked sheepishly. Leonis? Seeing her sister fidget bashfully, Chatters recalled the 10-year-old boy from Ryzelia Crystalia's platoon. Apparently, he'd been on the Hyperion during the hijacking incident. Altaria seemed to be under the mistaken impression that he was the one who'd saved her. Chatters didn't have the heart to tell her younger sister that she'd gotten the wrong idea about how events played out. Don't worry. I won't fight seriously against a child, Chatters assured her nonchalantly, shrugging in an attempt to soothe her siblings' concerns. If I may, Chatters, let me warn you, Sir Leonis is very strong. Yes, right. I'll make sure to be wary. The strongest student Holy Swordswoman watched Altaria pout and puff up her cheeks, noting that even that was adorable when it came from her little sister. Chapter 3. Thrown to Another World? When Leonis opened his eyes, he saw a vast, windswept wilderness. A cloud of black dust covered his field of vision like a swarm of insects. Where am I? After blinking a few times, Leonis tried to look around. Countless odd rock formations dotted the wastes, but he couldn't make out anything else of note. This barren land extended as far as the eye could see. The sky was red as blood and unmarred by any clouds. The gigantic Leviathan was gone. It seems I've wandered into some kind of other realm. An underworld perhaps. After a moment's confusion at the unusual sight, Leonis concluded that the Azure Hold had been transported to another dimension or world, and he'd been caught in that process. I never knew that aerial fortress could traverse the plains. It was just like his bastion, the otherworldly castle. Was that really Azrael? Leonis wondered, placing a hand on his chin. Azrael, a visitor from a different dimension. Roselia Ishtaris had summoned the devil of the underworld from some other realm. Of the 8 Dark Lords, he was the most shrouded in mystery. None save the goddess herself saw their true form. Azrael was believed to lack a physical body. Only by possessing a vessel were they able to use their powers. Why, then, had they taken over Duke Crystalia, Ryzelia's father? No. Him being possessed by Azrael is still only a theory. Still, he could freely traverse dimensional gates, wielded lost sorcery, and knew of the Dark Lords. And most suspicious of all, he said, my goddess, of all the Dark Lords, the only ones to swear genuine fealty to Roselia Ishtaris were Leonis and Azrael. The others all used the Dark Lord's armies as a means to further their own ambitions. The devil of the underworld always respectfully referred to Roselia as my goddess. However, there was no knowing for certain if Duke Crystalia had been referring to Roselia when he used the phrase. I suppose he flew off somewhere. Leonis couldn't see the man anywhere, and the Azure Hold and that Leviathan were absent as well. Vro had vanished, too, as had Rives, Rives Deep Sea, one half of the Lord of the Seas, was a sea sprite. Somehow, she'd broken free from the man's mind-controlling holy sword. Before worrying about anything else, I need to figure out how to escape this world. Leonis marched through the sandstorm-buffeted wastes. He already knew of one way to return home. It wasn't a field he was exceptionally proficient in, but as a master of all manners of sorcery, he knew multiple spells to create gates to other dimensions. In fact, the underground that the demon wolf pack used as their hideout had been created with one. It linked the 7th Assault Garden to a different plane. Opening portals to other dimensions was no simple feat, though. One needed to have the coordinates of their prior world, or else there was no telling where the magic would send them. It might fling them to the bottom of the sea or inside a boulder. When Leonis was at his full might as the undead king, he might have braved the risks and tried it anyway, but his current body was that of a fragile 10-year-old boy. He couldn't take such a gamble. I suppose my only recourse is to seek out Azrael. Leonis didn't know how large this world was, but if Azrael was moving with the Azure Hold, finding them wouldn't be too challenging. Suddenly, a massive shadow passed over the land. Leonis looked up. What's that? A large creature resembling a stingray glided through the air. Had to measure over 100 melts end to end. Its gigantic fins undulated with every movement, scattering a nauseating miasma as it lorded over the sky. Countless arms sprouted out of its torso, each writhing seemingly of its own will. Two large, white fangs extended from its mouth. No, they weren't fangs. Careful inspection revealed that its maw was filled with voids. The being's appearance was an affront to life itself. And even Leonis, the undead king, felt only disgust and aversion to it. A void? He whispered. Immediately, the flying monster changed bearing and looked directly at him. It spotted me from that high up. The hands sticking out from its stomach started glowing, each of them alight with a different elemental affinity. It was the radiance of sorcery. TCH. Boom, 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 boom. A shower of offensive spells bombarded the rocky wasteland. Intense flames erupted, blowing away the dust. And at the epicenter of the explosion. So these despicable void monsters run rampant in this world, too, Leonis muttered while the black smoke cleared. He'd cast a defensive spell, so there wasn't so much as a speck of soot on his Excalibur Academy uniform. After retrieving the Staff of Sealed Sins from his shadow, Leonis held it high, chanting another spell. I'll reduce you to ashes. 8th order flame spell, Algubelzilga. Boom. A fireball erupted from the rod, striking its mark directly. It bore a hole in the gigantic void stomach, from which void miasma gushed out like blood. Oh, you can withstand the strongest of fire spells? Quite the durable one, aren't you? A moment before the spell hit the void, the hands sprouting from its stomach all deployed defensive spells as one. However, most of those arms had been destroyed by Leonis's magic anyway, and the void's regeneration couldn't keep up. Exclamation mark. The void let out a furious howl and opened its mouth. I see. It's like a host for void parasites. The swarm that emerged from the gigantic void droned like insects and flew at Leonis. He shrugged and tapped the Staff of Sealed Sins against the ground. Very well. I am a bit tired from repeated fighting, but I'll play along for now. Cackling wickedly, he intoned a new spell. Before he could finish, however, shatter. A sound like shattering glass rent the air. What? A blade of water laced with mana sped across the wasteland, cutting through the swarm of voids like a hot knife through butter. It continued farther, cleaving into the gigantic void overhead. Miasma spurted across the red sky. The 100 melt-long void was then cut into 4 cubes, then 8, then 16, all of which fell to the ground with heavy thuds. Leonis hurried to evade the tumbling blocks of flesh, searching for the source of the water blade. Standing atop a misshaped rock formation stood an expressionless girl, her hair the color of amethyst. Rive's deep sea, Leonis whispered, although she didn't hear him. The girl watched him, gaze as deep as the ocean floor. Human child. Who are you? Really? Her question echoed softly through the wasteland covered in void corpses. I never imagined that the undead king would adopt such an adorable form. Rives patted Leonis on the head a few times. Grr, don't touch me, Lord of the Seas. Leonis brushed her hand away, his hair standing on end. The Lord of the Seas had been hesitant to believe Leonie's claim that he was the undead king. When he showed her the Staff of Sealed Sins, the Dark Lord's army's symbol of death, and summoned his prided legion of skeleton soldiers, she accepted the story immediately. According to Rives, many sorcerers used undead fighters, but the only one who could maintain a contingent of splendidly polished bone warriors was the undead king. Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. Leonie nodded to himself, satisfied. He was always quite picky when it came to choosing his skeletons. Leonie gave a dry cough and looked up at Rives. Lord of the Seas, there's something I wish to ask you. The girl nodded arrogantly. You have permission to inquire, undead king. Condescending, aren't you? Leonie thought, blind to his own shortcomings. Needless to say, the Dark Lords were all quite arrogant. Were you under that human's mind control? Leonie questioned. At this, Rives's eyes glinted ominously. Yes. My pride as the Lord of the Seas has been tarnished by ever allowing it to occur. Perhaps recalling what happened angered her, because her water mantle started writhing, alive with mana. I'd always believed you were beset upon by the spellweaver of the 6 heroes and the battle ended in mutual destruction, Leonie remarked. Indeed, the Leviathan and I defeated Diruda the spellweaver just as he bested us, and we sank to the depths along with the underwater stronghold. So you mean you were not completely slain, Leonie said. Rives bobbed her head. However, Daruda's powerful magic drove me to the brink. Thus, I decided to change to a jewel that would slowly absorb mana from the ocean floor until the day came for me to rise again. 1,000 years passed while she slumbered. At some point, that human found the jewel at the bottom of the sea and released me. I cannot remember precisely when it happened, but it was not too long ago. Rives bit her lip gently. Having been rudely awakened from my peaceful slumber, I tried to tear the scoundrel to bits, but the human anticipated as much and had a trump card to hold me in check. Leonie raised an eyebrow. A trump card? The cur had already dominated my other half. The Leviathan, Rives replied bitterly. You mean you weren't the one to resurrect the Leviathan? No, I don't know what heretical means that human employed to restore my other half, but he succeeded. Spurred by wrath over the theft of my kindred spirit, I challenged him to battle and was defeated. Rives Deep Sea, the Lord of the Seas, was seen as the strongest of all the Dark Lords. However, the position was held by 2 beings that acted as one Dark Lord. Rives, the Sea Sprite Queen, and the single greatest form of life, the Leviathan. Only when the 2 acted as one did they function as the Lord of the Seas, and with the Leviathan taken from her, Rives had no chance of winning. And so I succumbed to his mental domination, Rives explained, her voice trembling with anger. Do you remember what happened while you were under his thrall? Leonie questioned. I vaguely recall what occurred slightly before I was freed from his control. I remember fighting you. Rives leaned forward and gazed into Leonie's eyes. Undead King, in defeating me, you have freed me from that man's domination. I owe you a debt of gratitude. I see, Leonie replied vaguely. He wasn't sure if Rives's liberation resulted from his efforts. It was possible, yet there could have been other factors at play. Perhaps when a man tried to use his holy sword on Vra, its hold on Rives waned temporarily. Or, Leonie's holy sword, the Excalibur 20. Maybe it affected other holy swords in some way. Regardless, Rives was only one of his unwitting pawns. Azrael, the demon of the underworld. What did they hope to achieve by awakening a Dark Lord? Incidentally, Undead King, Rives called out to Leonie, stirring him from contemplation. What is it? Where are we? Rives asked, looking around with a frown. Another world, Leonie answered. Another dimension. Another world or dimension? It seems that when the Azure Hold traveled to a different realm, we were transported along with it. I see. Yes, the ocean is nowhere to be found. It took you this long to notice? Leonie shrugged in exasperation. Rives scanned over the blocks of flesh scattered around them. What was that unsightly monster earlier? I've never seen a creature of the sort before. A void. Unknown life forms born of the emptiness. Rives cocked her head to one side, seemingly confused. The gigantic voids remained still, spewed miasma. I didn't expect to find voids running rampant in another world. Maybe this desolate scenery resulted from the destruction the monstrous thing sowed. "I'll be going after that man," Leonese declared, his eyes fixed on the red sky. "I have much to ask him." "I shall accompany you." Then, Rives decided, "I must reclaim my Leviathan." Leonese took a moment to consider. Although she was in an incomplete state, Rives was still half of a Dark Lord. Her strength was remarkable, and they had fought side by side once 1,000 years ago to defeat the god of the sea. Although Leonese had no way of telling what Rives was thinking, she was still a Dark Lord who was comparatively easy to cooperate with. "Very well. Come with me, then." Leonese tapped the staff of sealed sins against the ground. "Come forth, Skull Dragon." Vrarararararara. A skeletal dragon emerged from the boy's shadow and spread its wings. Leonese sat upon the skull dragon's neck, and Rives hopped atop it softly with the lightness of a flower petal to join him. "You can fly on your own, can't you?" Leonese asked. "I merely thought that riding atop the famed undead king's skull dragon might make for an interesting experience," Rives reasoned coolly. Leonese shrugged. "It's not my problem if you fall off." The skull dragon let out an eldritch howl and took to the air. "Hey, stop right there, Leo, NN?" Leonese turned around at the familiar voice. A beautiful girl flew behind the soaring skull dragon, her flaming red hair trailing after her. "Oh, so you were close by, too. Don't you owe me?" That flashy show you two put on was easy to spot, and I flew over, Vra said, landing with a tap on the skull dragon's snout. "You're going after that man, right?" "Yes." "Then I'm coming along. I need to reclaim the azure hold from him." Leonese sighed. "Do as you please." They were all going in the same direction anyway. Vra-eyed Rives, who had taken her seat on the skull dragon's back. "Rives, we still have a score to settle over the azure hold." "I have no desire to battle you right now, Dragon Lord." The Lord of the Seas glared back at Vra. "However, if you insist on fighting, I will gladly oblige." HMPH. "Defeating you when you're without your Leviathan would mar my reputation as the Dragon Lord. I'm willing to consider this a ceasefire for now." Vra combed through her crimson hair with one hand. HMPH. "Very well," Rives accepted. "Stop picking fights while you're on my skull dragon." "You too." Leonese shuddered at the very notion. "So which way are we flying, Leo?" Vra inquired. "I don't know," he answered frankly, his eyes fixed forward. "For now, let's see how far this other world goes." Chapter 4. Apostles of the Goddess. "You're still looking with your eyes. There's no point unless you sense them with mana." "Oh, okay." Rizelia replied energetically under the blazing sun. She and the others were at a large, anti-void weapons training facility, part of the Shangri-La Resort and thus owned by the Fillet Corporation. The exercise was quite simple. Leonese unleashed mana spheres, and Rizelia had to dodge them. At first, she could keep up, but evading became more challenging as the number of VOBs increased. While she escaped direct hits, she quickly grew exhausted. "Ha, ha, ha," Rizelia panted. "Is this as far as you can go? If this kind of training is enough to make you throw in the towel." Not yet." "Give me more, please," Rizelia called out, wiping the sweat off her jaw. "Well, you've got the right attitude, if nothing else. This time, I think I'll get serious." Phew. It was only then that Rizelia understood. Leo's been holding back this whole time. "Go, go, Lady Celia. Keep it up, Lady Celia." A voice encouraged from nearby. Rizelia turned around, only to find Regina. "What are you doing?" "I'm cheering you on, Lady Celia." "Go, go, Lady Celia." Regina jumped around energetically with pom-poms in her hands. For some reason, she changed into a cheerleader outfit and appeared to be enjoying it thoroughly. Stop it. This is embarrassing." Rizelia chided her. "If anything, I'm the one who should be embarrassed," Regina replied. "Then apologize and stop it." "Turning your back, are you? Let's add some more balls, then," Leonese said, producing countless mana spheres that sped at Rizelia. Sometime later, "Here, Lady Celia, a drink." "Thank you, Regina." Rizelia, lying face up on the ground, accepted a sports drink from Regina and gulped it down. Leonese shrugged. "That should do for morning training." "Morning training? That was just warm up." Our session later will be even more demanding, Leonie stated mercilessly. Huh? Rizelia whimpered. Real Leo, please come back already. It was quite unusual to hear Rizelia whine aloud. Kid, I want to rest a bit. I'm exhausted from all this cheering, Regina said. Very well. Use this break to rest up. Immediately, Rizelia sat up. Why are you so soft on Regina? For some odd reason, this fake Leonie seemed to hold Regina in high regard. We'll be meeting up with Miss Fine and Sakia during the afternoon, right? Regina asked. Yes, that was the plan, but Sakia had turned down the offer to train together, claiming she needed to do some independent practice. Her methods were unique, so that made sense. Typically, she spent her mornings in the woods behind the Resvulgradorm, cutting falling leaves before they hit the ground or jumping between the trees. Normal training probably doesn't cut it for her. Camelot's Area Vi, the undeveloped sector. It was originally a generic expansion module for construction of the 3rd Assault Garden's industrial production plants. However, the 3rd Assault Garden's destruction 6 years ago had put that project on hold. At present, it was used only as a dumping site for construction material. The linear rail ran to it to transport supplies. People hardly ever went out there. Area Vi appeared deserted, save for several artificial elementals made by the Fillet Company, which patrolled the area. However, that was only on the surface. Deep below the undeveloped section was an entire underground world. Area Vi's bowels served as a home for smugglers, criminals, hooligans, anti-royalty terrorists, and even heretical sects that worshipped the voids. Why doesn't the Empire's army crush all these underground organizations? A girl wondered as she walked down a tunnel illuminated by mana lamps. Her name was Alka Alizio, an elf warrior with beautiful, pointed ears and jade hair tied in a ponytail. Outwardly, she looked pretty young, but she was, in fact, a seasoned hero. And through some twist of fate that even she couldn't explain adequately, she'd become part of a criminal organization. Sakia, who walked beside Al, replied, "It could stomp them all out together, but it would mean suffering losses. Plus, having them far from the capital's center and gathered in one place makes them easier to handle. The army has quashed a few criminal sects before, but it only made them break into more extreme factions and spread to other assault gardens." I see. Al recalled that the group she'd fallen in with, the Demon Wolf Pack, was originally an anti-royal terrorist organization. Looks like that's the place. Sakia looked up from her map and pointed ahead. An intense neon mana glow shone at the far end of the tunnel. Are we really going to charge in? Al asked. Yes, no offense to my upperclassmen, but normal training isn't enough for me. I'm more suited to learning through live combat. I see, but why did I have to come along, too? Lied the other girl, pouting. This was the first time Sakia had contacted Al via her terminal. The elf hero still wasn't sure why. I figured I'd get lost on my own. And you looked like you had time on your hands, Sakia reasoned, shrugging. I do not have time on my hands. I'll have you know I've been very busy investigating the Dark Lord's identity. Al countered. Unfortunately, the Dark Lord's Olvaders hadn't contacted the Demon Wolf Pack in the last few days, so her efforts had turned up little. Besides, you're the only friend I have who knows this side of me. Sakia pulled a fox mask from her chest and smiled. What do you mean? Wait, friend? Al's ears perked up. Sakia cocked her head. Aren't we friends, huh? Well, yes, I suppose. I guess we are friends. Al mouthed the word awkwardly, a blush creeping over her cheeks. A friend. In all her life, she'd never had anyone she could address as such. Al had been chosen at birth by one of the Arc-7 to shoulder the duty of saving the world. Her elf village had left her in the care of the Swordmaster at the Six Heroes. Well, if you need my help that badly, I suppose I'll escort you. Thank you. I don't know if it's appropriate compensation, but... Sakia grinned, pulling a ticket from her pocket and handing it to Al. What's this? A spectator ticket for the Holy Sword Dance Festival. They gave them out to the participants. I can have this? Yes. I'd be glad if you came to watch. HHMPH. I'll eyed the ticket. I'll take it. I'm not sure if I'll be able to attend, however. I mean, I'm busy, but we're friends. And all. The pair continued toward their objective while discussing the upcoming event. They came upon a metallic door blocked behind a few stacked crates of supplies. Loud music, clattering, and shouts were audible from beyond. Let's go in. Sakia donned her festival fox mask and stepped inside. The room past the door was much more spacious than either girl had expected. At one point, it had likely been a supple warehouse. A melody boomed, and a throng of rough-looking people shouted over the noise. Al frowned, her long ears flicking. What racket? It makes my ears hurt. Sakia pushed straight through the crowd, approaching the center of the chamber. There, she and Al saw a large fighting ring illuminated by many overhead lamps. This was an underground arena where the city's criminals gathered to test their mettle. Oh, what's this? I don't think girlies like you belong here. A werewolf man with sharp claws grabbed Sakia by the shoulder as she approached the ring. I want to fight, too, she replied. It's open to anyone, isn't it? Stop fooling around, girl. The Black Fangs run this place. The werewolf snarled at her. Activate. Argent light flashed through the darkness. Sakia's Reikiramayu cut the werewolf's whiskers short. What? The beastman froze, his eyes wide with astonishment. The crowd broke into an uproar. Sakia peered into the ring, Reikiramayu still crackling with lightning. Good. There are other holy swordsmen here. Sakia's gaze settled on a hulking man with a large broadsword alight with flames. Using holy swords in urban spaces was strictly forbidden outside of emergencies. This man may have been a member of some anti-government organization, or perhaps just a combat junkie who wanted the chance to wield his holy sword to his heart's content. Whoever he is doesn't matter to me. Sakia stepped onto the ring and readied Reikiramayu. Now, which one of you wants to try me first? Or maybe. She looked down on the people waiting to get into the ring. You all want to come at me at once? I don't mind. A cybernetic assault garden, made up of electronic terminals. The astral garden. In this infinite space formed by a grid of geometric cubes, the Queen of the Night spread her wings, sailing elegantly through the air. She wore an alluring black dress that boldly emphasized her cleavage, giving Elfine an appearance that would shock those who knew her. Elfine herself had designed this avatar. I can't let Ryzelia and the others see me like this. While she'd worn a witch costume during the Holy Light Festival, Elfine wanted to don bold, sexy outfits like Ryzelia and the others more often. How would that boy react if he saw her as the Queen of the Night? Would his heart skip a beat, like when he saw Ryzelia's provocative costume? What a silly idea. Before long, she discovered what she was looking for within the vast sea of information. A black cat hopping from grid to grid. Good work, Kate Scythe. It was an artificial elemental that Elfine had created from one of the Eye of the Witch orbs. She'd asked Leonese to slip it into a fillet-owned casino so that it might infiltrate the establishment's main network. The Fillet Company's base of operations was situated in Camelot's central garden, and was supremely well defended. Accessing records on the business's artificial elementals would be challenging, even for Elfine. Hopefully, this confidential data from my brother's casino will give me a way in. Though, Elfine cradled the black cat in her arms and accepted the information cube it held. She used the Eye of the Witch to scan it for any viruses, then accessed it carefully. The geometric cube opened up, and data on casino patrons poured into an Eye of the Witch orb. Elfine sought information to explain her brother's, Finzel Fillet's, connection to the Demon Sword project. That wasn't all, however. She was also after anything related to Dean Fraud Fillet, her father and the man who killed her mother. What's this? There was something unusual within the list of customers. Apparently, priests from the human church had visited the casino multiple times. The religion advocated for eliminating the voids, and although it didn't preach abstinence from vices it once had, it still felt unusual for a priest to frequent a gambling establishment. Records indicated multiple people coming and going from the casino, but the names used were clearly aliases. Is it possible they're all the same person? I might have to look into this. Elfine was already aware of the army's involvement in the early stages of the D project. If the military, The Fillet Company and the human church were all wrapped up in this. I can't imagine taking this on alone. She'd set herself up against a massive conspiracy. But was it right to drag Rizelia and the others into such a dangerous battle? Elfine thought of someone, and she saw a 10-year-old boy's face. Leo. By now, Elfine was confident that he was no mere refugee child. She still had data on him that should have gone to the Administrative Bureau. Back when the Void Stampede descended on the 7th Assault Garden. When the Void Reef vanished. When they engaged that mysterious Void Lord in the 3rd Assault Garden. And when the Void Hive in the ancient ruins was abruptly eradicated. That 10-year-old boy was always involved somehow. Elfine didn't know who he really was or what he intended. Still, he might be able to. Somewhere, deep down, she carried a kind of expectation of him. Was he this world's hope? Or perhaps he was. Elfine's older sister had told her about them way back. A Dark Lord, an incarnation of destruction and chaos that burned the ancient world. Find anything interesting? A voice inquired, disrupting Elfine's contemplation. The girl's eyes widened. The data cube fizzled away into particles of light and changed shape. Now it looked like a fairy just large enough to rest in Elfine's hands if she cupped them. It took flight and fluttered over her like a butterfly, its black wings sprinkling luminous motes as they beat. What? Elfine called out in alarm. Did the information cube conceal a backdoor access point? Hey, it's nice to meet you, miss. I've been dying to. The fairy stopped in midair and regarded her with a cherubic smile. My name is Seraphim. I'm a messenger that conveys the voice of the goddess. Seraphim. Elfine froze from shock. She knew that name. She'd been working to discover the truth behind it for some time. An entity called Seraphim had appeared to some of Excalibur Academy's holy swordsmen, including Lyot Guinness, the captain of the 7th Platoon, Elfine's old unit. Seraphim granted them the power of demon swords. Evidently, Seraphim was a Fillet Company mass-produced artificial elemental. Oh. You know me already. I'm so happy to hear that. The fairy girl giggled. You're the one who gave Lyot and the others their demon swords, aren't you? Me? No, I'm incapable of producing or granting demon swords, Seraphim replied. All I do is relay the goddess's voice to those who seek power. Goddess? Many students who wielded the demon swords mentioned hearing the voice of some goddess, but Elfine had assumed it to be the artificial elemental. What do you mean? Aren't you the one creating the demon swords? Elfine questioned. Seraphim sneered. You humans know nothing about the holy swords. You keep telling yourselves the lie that they come from the planet's power, wielding them without knowing what they actually are. What? What are you saying? Holy swords and demon swords are the same, in essence. The fairy smiled alluringly and peered into Elfine's dark eyes. Tell me, Elfine Fillet, don't you desire strength? What? Open yourself to the goddess's words. If your holy sword were to be reborn as a demon sword, you'd wield the power of a true witch. And with it, you'd surpass your brother, and even that monster, Count Fraud Fillet. The seductive whisper tickled her earlobe. Was it the fairy who spoke, or was this irresistible, overwhelming voice perhaps? Stop looking inside my head. Elfine glared at the artificial elemental. And don't think you can trick me that easily. Her holy sword, the Eye of the Witch, loosed a flash that destroyed the grid forming the space around them and triggered a loud alarm. Demon swords can't be allowed to exist, and that goes for the people who create them, too. Elfine declared. That's a pity, the fairy replied from someplace unseen. You would have made an excellent witch, maybe even an apostle. Let's meet again someday, shall we? In the goddess's world, a single black feather fluttered down to Elfine's feet. An upside-down palace floated in the infinite void. This was the otherworldly castle, a structure that belonged to one of the 8 Dark Lords, Azrael, the devil of the underworld. This mobile fortress was the only base in the Dark Lord's army's command capable of moving between dimensions. At present, its owner was absent, and it couldn't travel between planes, but it was still a sturdy bastion. This castle's reception hall, a temple chamber that stood upside down, with a ceiling serving as the floors, was filled to the brim with gigantic eyes. No, not eyes, jewels. Black gems polished like mirrors, The many eye-like stones reflected the lone visitor to this bizarre chamber. He was a tall man in a classy suit, with such handsome features, one could even call him beautiful. However, dark madness burned in his eyes. This was Count Philip's second son, Funzel Philip, the leader of the Demon Sword Project and a traitor to humanity. Rejoice, ye sly fool of a short-lived race, for your accomplishments have marked you worthy of attending this banquet, declared one of the eyes above him. I am honored, apostles of the goddess. He fell prostrate, regarding the echoing voice with awe and respect. Funzel felt like a cold blade hung above his nape. His life meant nothing to the courtiers of this place. You have asked to bask your flesh in the goddess's blessing to become a void. Another spoke from the eyes. It was the clingy, viscous, and stagnant voice of a woman. Yes, that is my true wish. Should you lend your ear to the goddess's voice and bask in her blessing, you shall cease to be a man and become part of the emptiness that covers all in this world. Ooh, what a glorious fate. There is no higher honor for me. Funzel raised his head and cried out in craving, his eyes fanatical. Will you become a traitor to humanity and consign your homeland to be burned away by the voids? The capital was nothing but a prison to me, my father, my brother, the holy swords, none of them acknowledged me. The assault gardens, my world, even this despicable human shell. I cast them away without a single regret. Very well. The eyes overhead gazed down upon the man, and loud laughter filled the inverted chamber. Funzel Philip, he who the goddess guided to betray humankind. We shall grant you the privilege to advance into the deepest depths of the hidden temple to meet our goddess. Oh. You have my everlasting thanks, gracious apostles. However, an eye swiveled above the man weeping in gratitude. That will only come after you have completed the task the goddess has assigned you. Funzel Philip hung his head. Yes, of course. Preparations for the pseudo-goddess creation, the Deep Project, and the Void Shift are complete. I shall be as your hands and feet, great apostles, and exact the goddess's will, the will of the goddess. For this world to be reborn in emptiness. The will of the goddess. For this world to be reborn in emptiness, Funzel Philip echoed, chanting the words as though they were from scripture. The air around him bent and warped, and his body seemed to fold up and vanish. Silence reigned in the chamber until one of the floating eyes deigned to speak. Will he really be of use, old one? Worry not. Even rusted swords have a use. That man would not have advanced the pseudo-goddess creation and the Deep Project had he lacked devotion. But there's still the matter of the rogue sword master. That ceaselessly evolving monster still wanders about, seeking to spill our goddess's blood. The divine dragon is tracking Shah Dark Void Lord. The sword master isn't our only problem. There is another out there. An unknown element. They're trying to gather the Dark Lords before we can. The 14th apostle, Zamin, went to the undead king's resting place, yet found that his old master was already missing. And Zamin was slain shortly afterward. Deviations are appearing in the prophecy. The space in the center of the room warped, and a figure appeared, a white-haired young man wearing the garb of the human church, Nefakes Void Lord, the 13th apostle. He grinned, tapping his staff against the floor. I just saw your last guest on the way back. He was quite overjoyed at having been granted an audience with the goddess. How go your preparations, Lord Nefakes? A viscous, womanly voice inquired. Perfectly. I've already taken care of everything within the human church. Oh? Good. You can leave the rest to us. Of course, Lady Iris. As Nefakes bowed his head respectfully, one of the eyes overhead changed into particles of light, spreading around the upside-down chamber like grains of sand. The luminous specks coalesced together, assuming the form of a woman. The stunning beauty had crimson eyes and sleek black hair that trailed to her waist. She wore a pitch-black dress adorned with skulls and a dark robe over it. This was the 9th apostle and leader of the Dark Lord's army's necromancy unit, Iris Void Priestess. She had been a commander directly beneath the undead king, Leonie's Death Magnus. And as a dark priestess, she had been entrusted with Rose Ishtares' oracle. She licked her crimson lips and smiled alluringly. Hey. I look forward to the moment when a celebration of humanity's hope becomes the day all hell breaks loose. Chapter 5. Three Dark Lords in the Wasteland. A lovely humming filled the hotel bathroom, with the jovial sounds of splashing water. It was the morning of the 18th Platoon's third day in the capital. Shari, back in her natural form for the first time in a while, was enjoying a soak alone. Normally, she cleansed herself at a spring within the realm of shadows. This time, however, she took advantage of the fact that she was staying at a high-class hotel and decided to enjoy the tub in Ryselia's room. After spending so much time as Leonie's yesterday, she felt worn out. Of course, she was honored to serve as his body double, but having to keep up a convincing act was stressful. Shari stretched her legs to help her stiff calves relax. A sweet aroma wafted from the rose petals scattered in the water. The time before Ryzelia Crystalia awoke was a brief respite for her. The speed with which that girl grows is astounding. It was only a few months ago that Leonie's sorcery made her an undead. She was already mastering second-order offensive spells, an impressive feat, even for a vampire queen. Surely the special training from Leonie's and the three champions of Rogners played a part, but there was no doubting Ryzelia possessed exceptional raw potential. Or perhaps it was more accurate to call it raw spirit. Whatever the exercise, Ryzelia endured, making her a good student. The girl differed drastically from the nobles Shari knew in the realm of shadows. It pains me to admit it, but I can see why my lord is so taken with her. The training had worn Shari out as well. She had to balance it with investigating the capital, keeping the demon wolf pack under control, and her part-time job at the confectionery. When my lord returns, I ought to demand donuts as a special reward. Or maybe a pat on the head. Shari's cheeks turned red, and she submerged the lower half of her face in the water, blowing bubbles. My lord, when will you return? And that's when. Leo, are you in the bath? Ryselia's voice called out from beyond the door. Shari jolted in alarm. She's up this early? Ryselia's adaptability was impressive. She'd been sleeping like a baby this time yesterday. I'll be right out. Shari changed her voice to Leonie's and stood with a splash. Don't worry. I'm just stepping in to take a quick shower. Oh, I see. Wait, what? The sliding door rattled as it opened to reveal a nude Ryzelia. Her silvery hair wavered in the steam. Why? Shari exclaimed. Why did you come in? I always bathe with Leo, huh? Ryselia's ice blue eyes went wide. A girl? Shari grimaced, and she tensed from her spot in the tub. Forgive me, my lord. Hey, what a surprise. I never imagined you were such a cute girl, Ryzelia said, turning to look at Shari while tending to her wet hair with a hairdryer. What a defeat. I live in the shadows, and yet, Shari mumbled, sitting on the bed and cradling her head in her hands. Having deemed it pointless to maintain her Leonie's facade, she was wearing her usual maid's dress. I was careless, and I'd kept myself perfectly hidden so far, too. The truth was that she hadn't kept herself as well concealed as she believed. Shari glanced up at Ryzelia. The assassin's way dictates that I have to make her disappear or kill her now that she knows, but Shari's dusk-colored eyes glinted dangerously. The assassination society she'd once belonged to, Septentrion, had methods of dispatching the undead. But she couldn't eliminate her master's minion. Ugh. My lord is going to be so mad at me. Shari cradled her head again while the sound of the dryer died down. Ryzelia approached Shari and peered into her face. We've met somewhere before, right? She asked. Impossible. I always hide in the shadows. I've seen a maid ghost in our dorm a few times. Shari averted her eyes. You were imagining things. All right, we'll just leave it at that. Ryzelia smiled and straightened up, stretching her knees. Let's get started on our training. Leo, the Dragon Lord, the Lord of the Seas, and the Undead King. Three of the Dark Lords who had once plunged the world into an age of terror were now soaring above this other world. After flying for the whole night, all they'd learned about this place the devil of the underworld had sent them to was that the sky was red. It had a sun, so there was a visible difference between day and night. However, the view above remained the color of blood, and thick void miasma brewed behind the dense clouds. This is a hellish place, Leonie's whispered as he looked down at the surface from atop the skull dragon's back. In the past, When Leonis warred with the Everdok Queen, he marched his army through the land of Demise, located deep within the Terminus mountain range. But even the land of Demise, rife with the fog of death, wasn't as desolate as this realm. This was a world where emptiness ruled all. Maybe the voids appearing in our world originate from this one? Leonis posited. Voids, unknown beings that took the forms of monsters from ages past. If they were born here, this could be a chance to stomp them out at their source. Leonis's stomach suddenly grumbled, pulling him out of his thoughts. What is it, Leonis? Are you hungry? Rives Deep Sea asked, tilting her head to one side. How curious. The undead king needs to eat like a living person. Leonis looked back and saw Rives observing him curiously. HMPH. And you sea sprites subsist on storing the sea's mana in your bodies, if I recall. Indeed. But that's not to say we abstain from food. When the underwater stronghold was still intact, I feasted upon the sacrifices made to me by the deep sea folk. Hey, what are you two on about? Vra, flying ahead of the skull dragon, dropped her speed and pulled up alongside Leonis. Do you not get hungry, dragon girl? Well, come to think of it, it's been 3 days since I've eaten anything, Vra replied, growling a bit at Rives. You didn't eat those monstrosities? Are you mocking me, Lord of the Seas? Who would eat those things? I do remember you tearing up the voids with your jaws, though. Leonis pondered if that counted as eating them. Vro had been flying non-stop since she left the capital. Dark Lords didn't require slumber or food to stay alive, but that didn't make them incapable of resting. Perhaps we should stop for a break, Leonis suggested. I can still keep flying, Vro said. Well, I'm quite hungry, I swear. This human body is so inconvenient. Leonis stood on the skull dragon's head and used the mystic eye of farsight to observe the surroundings. Through it, he discovered a hill with a commanding view of the surroundings. Let's land there. As night descended upon this other world, the ominous red skies were washed over with black. The 3 Dark Lords sat atop the barren hill around a campfire of everlasting flame produced by sorcery. Leonis, what is this? Rives asked curiously. She was holding a can of preserved food that Leonis had produced from the realm of shadows. This is one embodiment of modern humanity's wisdom, Leonis explained, oddly boasting as though it were his own accomplishment while opening another can. Try eating it. You'll see. These were military rations provided to investigation teams on Void Hive excursions. Before leaving the capital, Leonis separated part of the realm of shadows and took it with him, charging Shari with managing the rest in his absence. Since the capacity of the realm of shadows portion Leonis traveled with was limited, he didn't have many rations, but there were enough to last a few days. The 3 opened several kinds of cans and placed them before the flickering flames. Boiled white fish, corned beef, cooked beans, pilaf, curry soup, muffins made with dried fruit, bean stew, and pudding. Rives used a spoon to taste the corned beef. I see. It's quite delectable. It's tasty but not very filling, Vra added from her spot on the ground. I wonder if we couldn't find a cow or 3 somewhere around here. Leonis's head perked up. Oh, so dragons eat cattle? Yeah. We burn down mountains with our fire breath and pick whichever cows were roasted the finest. Leviathans can swallow whales whole, Rives noted. Whales are delicious, too, Vra replied. I can't swallow one whole, though. Leonis observed the other Dark Lord's discussion with exasperation. Forget cows. I don't think we'll find anything alive here save for the voids, he said. And he couldn't say if those monstrosities of the emptiness even counted as living beings. Rives suddenly glanced over at Leonis. I believe it's my first time seeing you eat, undead king, she said. I'm used to it by now, Leonis stated as he chewed on his roasted beans. He didn't much care for the food, but a certain minion girl always scolded him when he neglected to eat his vegetables. I see. Rives nodded, watching in fascination as Leonis ate the canned food. Still, I did not expect a master sorcerer like you to fail a reincarnation spell. Mind your own business, Leonis shot back. You were originally undead, after all. You did not need to reincarnate. So why did you not simply slumber for 1,000 years? I couldn't do that. I was a special undead, created by the goddess, and what's more, The goddess had instructed him to use sorcery to reincarnate. When Roselia Ishtaris raised the hero Leonie's shelter as an undead, his human soul was placed in an undead body. However, his hero soul couldn't acclimate to that new form, meaning it would wear away with time. Regardless, there was merit to Rives's inquiry. Leonie's looked down and sighed. It may have been a highly advanced 12th order spell, but Leonie's still had trouble accepting he'd failed. If he'd had no choice but to reincarnate as a human, he would have preferred a slightly older body, if nothing else. Had he been reborn in his prime as the hero, Rizelia and Regina wouldn't treat him like a child. After finishing their dinner of canned food, the three began discussing what to do next. We have no idea where that man is. Leonie's crossed his arms, looking up to the stars twinkling in the night sky. They still had no grasp on how large this world was, either. Going after their target without any clues would be difficult. The only thing we have to go on is the Azure Hold. This structure is the original template of the human cities, a gate with which to reach the stars. What did that man mean when he said that? Wasn't the Azure Hold just a flying fortress? Did you know the Azure Hold could traverse dimensions? No, I didn't know anything about that. The Dragon Lord looked away and sulked for some reason. The Azure Hold was discovered in the depths of the earth by the great dragon elders generations before me. They investigated its functions and realized it was capable of flying, and you used it as your stronghold despite knowing nothing about who constructed it? Rives knit her brow, exasperated. The great dragons don't mind little details like that. Maybe you should start minding them. Then, Leonie's whispered. His eyes narrowed. I admit that the Azure Hold possesses mysterious ancient mechanisms that we dragons couldn't fully comprehend. One was the Almagest, an astronomical observation device that recorded the movements of the stars. Leonie's was aware of the device. Vro had searched for the Azure Hold on the ocean floor because she wanted to use the Almagest to observe the changes in the stars' positions. A gate with which to reach the stars, he said. Leonie's recalled. I think it's safe to say that man knew the Azure Hold's original purpose. Just who was that human? Vro growled bitterly. Come to think of it, I still haven't told them. I think it's likely he's the devil of the underworld, Azrael. What? Vro exclaimed. Rives's eyes betrayed her disbelief. I have no real proof. This is only speculation, Leonie's prefaced before explaining his reasoning, and once he'd finished. I see. Yes. There were times when the devil of the underworld possessed human bodies. Vro nodded, convinced. As a spiritual life form, Azrael had to claim the flesh of another living being to maintain their form. The body didn't have to be human, although it seemed the devil of the underworld preferred them. So assuming that man is Azrael, what does he hope to achieve by using the Azure Hold and the Dark Lords? Rives wondered. Leonie's shook his head. Who can say? Had he known, it still wouldn't complete the picture. He kept this from the other two Dark Lords, but he's possessing the body of Rizelia's father, Duke Crystalia. That couldn't be a coincidence. There was undoubtedly a reason. Duke Crystalia had been investigating the Dark Lords, too. He'd been looking into legends surrounding the supposedly deceased Dark Lords and had even deciphered part of the ancient text. Thanks to that, Rizelia translated an epitaph that nearly exposed Leonie's true identity. Did Duke Crystalia summon Azrael in some way? In which case, was Duke Crystalia still acting of his own free will? He used the power of a holy sword. But holy swords were a power exclusive to humans. Was possession of a body enough to use one freely? Leo? Vro eyed the boy dubiously. There's no point in trying to discern his goals without all the information, Leonie's decided. We have to capture him. Yes, I suppose you're right, Vro agreed, spreading her shapely legs on the ground. But there's a chance he went back to our old world all on his own. No, I don't think that's likely, Leonie stated, looking up. Even the devil of the underworld can't travel between dimensions that easily. Crossing alone wouldn't be too difficult for him, but transporting the Azure Hold will require considerable preparation. Even the otherworldly castle, feared for its capability to appear anywhere, couldn't move between worlds effortlessly. Either way, we need to find him, and fast, Vuk included. Right. Leonis reached out for the night sky, eyes fixed upon it. He reached toward the sky of another world, where the positions of the stars were different. How strange. Somehow, his thoughts wandered to the minion girl he'd left behind in the capital. Should he tell her that Lord Crystalia, her father, was still alive? He longed to hear her voice, to feel the embrace of her arms, her fingers brushing through his hair. Absurd. This is almost like my word. How irksome. Leonis closed his eyes. Was Shari doing well as his body double? He trusted her but couldn't shake his concern. Today's training is complete. Rizelia returned to the entrance of the park, breathing heavily. Already? She looked up at Shari, disguised as Leonis. She glanced at the shadow hourglass sitting on a nearby bench, but only half the darkness within it had fallen to the bottom. Rizelia had finished much sooner than on her first day. Perhaps her body was getting accustomed to outputting the right amount of mana. She really is a vampire queen. This kind of potential is hard to come by. Shari tapped her replica of the Staff of Sealed Sins against the ground. Very well. Let's move on to the next step in your training, she stated. The next step? Rizelia asked. Controlling your mana. Oh, okay. Rizelia nodded vigorously. Unfortunately, she'd expended most of her mana and couldn't get up. After a moment of thought, Shari said, "Before we do, however, I'll give you special permission to suck my blood." She held out a finger to Rizelia, still on the ground. "Are you sure? You won't be able to continue training with your mana depleted." "Okay, then." Rizelia gulped and plopped Shari's fingertip into her mouth. "Ow. Hey, you're sucking too much." "Ah, I am sorry. I can't really help it." I'll learn some restraint, but Leo always lets me suck more. He just pampers you too much," Shari huffed, placing a hand on her waist. Rizelia continued nibbling on her finger, however. NFF. Shari, in Leonis's form, let out wanton moans. Eventually, Rizelia's argent hair began glowing faintly with mana. "Why, you've had enough, right?" Shari asked. "Why, yes, thank you." Rizelia looked unsatisfied, but Shari couldn't afford to have her take any more blood. Shari cleared her throat. "Then let's begin improving your mana control. You are a vampire queen, the strongest kind of undead." I am?" Rizelia asked, confused. "Yes. Honestly, in terms of sheer mana, your capacity is already greater than mine by now. Are you saying I can become as strong as Leo?" Rizelia questioned, ice blue eyes wide with amazement. "Don't get carried away." Shari struck Rizelia over the head with her staff. "Ow, our master is on a whole different level. If I were to compare you two, he is the sun and you are a mosquito." "A mosquito?" Rizelia stiffened up as if the word had stunned her emotionally. "It's not like I'm that indiscriminate when sucking blood." Shari ignored Rizelia's meek protest and carried on. "I want you to call upon the true ancestor's dress." "Huh? But I just replenished all my mana. Wouldn't that just deplete it all again?" "Yes, it would. And that's the point, question mark. As you are now, you haven't fully drawn out the true power of the true ancestor's dress. It devours the wearer's mana to strengthen their body but can also circulate mana to intensify the strength of your spells several times over. I see you don't quite understand." "Very well." Shari sighed and shrugged. "For now, just dress up." "Dress up?" Fine." Rizelia nodded, took a deep breath, and focused the mana in her body. Magical energy ran and raged, and a crimson dress, as red as blood, manifested and enveloped her body. "Her mana really is overwhelming," Shari whispered. "I can't really maintain this state for long," Rizelia confessed with a pained expression as she collapsed to her knees. Her mana would deplete entirely in less than a minute, and she'd lose consciousness. "Remain in this state and try circulating the mana inside your body." I can't. The way I am now, impossible." Rizelia moaned in pain. Her ice blue eyes glinted as an insuppressible craving for blood overwhelmed her. "Oh, fine." Shari took a step forward and jabbed Rizelia on the forehead with an index finger. "Ow!" Rizelia exclaimed. What did you do that for?" "I poked a pressure point to focus your mana. It's normally used as an assassination technique, though. A assassination? It's a technique called the death knell. It kills the target by poking a point where mana converges. Huh? Ryzelia screeched. Don't worry. You're already dead, Shari stated nonchalantly. More importantly, focus your mana in your forehead. Oh, okay. Ryzelia nodded, closed her eyes, and concentrated on her aching forehead. Her vampire queen's immense power gathered there. Before long, the mana raging inside her like a storm began circulating through her body. That's right. Maintain this state a while longer. All right. Ryzelia's silver hair glowed brightly, and her eyes turned crimson. After a few more seconds passed, however, I can apostrophe T. Keep going. The true ancestor's dress fluttered, mana billowing out of it like fire. Roselia returned to her training attire and collapsed limply. Shari bent down. Well done. It's always like that at first. We'll add this to your regular training regimen for the remaining days leading up to the festival. I want you to keep circulating your mana at all times, not just during practice, so you'll grow acclimated to how it feels. Ryzelia said nothing. She'd completely lost consciousness. I guess you do have some guts after all. Shari shrugged and lifted Ryzelia in her arms. Standing in the Central Garden's administrative sector was one building with a characteristically octagonal roof. This was the Saint Illumina's Monastery, a holy swordsman training school managed by the Human Church, the state religion of the Integrated Empire. It was much smaller than the 7th Assault Garden's Excalibur Academy or the 2nd Assault Garden's Military Instruction School, and maintained a policy to train only a select few. The holy swordsmen who graduated from the monastery were all skilled warriors who fought on the front lines. At the very center of the octagonal building was the Cathedral Hall, where a group of 4 was gathered. These students, clad in pure white, were the representatives who would participate in the Holy Sword Dance Festival. Each of them was an elite with a powerful holy sword and abundant combat experience against the voids, yet there was no light in their eyes whatsoever. They stood as still as the dead, their holy swords and zealous faith in the Human Church, the things that gave them their identities, had vanished. I handpicked them personally. What do you think? The white-haired young bishop asked with a grin. His head bowed to the woman standing before the cathedral's altar. Why does that matter? They're all just puppets for us. Iris Void Priestess was clad in a pitch-black dress, which clashed with the cathedral's brighter atmosphere. She beheld the young men and women as if appraising prey, before settling her gaze on a petite girl. But yes, I suppose, a girl with a lovely appearance will do quite well. Iris raised the girl's chin up, examining her like a jewel. After nodding in satisfaction, she leaned in and then sank her fangs into the girl's throat. The girl raised her voice for the first time. Her hands fell limply at her sides, and she looked overcome with rapture. She fully accepted this act of vampirism. The color drained from her youthful features. Her skin dried, and she swiftly became a puppet of skin and bone. That was quite delicious. The girl's body, limbs now thin like twigs, toppled to the floor. Having had her fill of blood, Iris licked her lips, and then, transformed into the girl whose blood she'd taken. Chapter 6 Void Goddess, Leo. Leonis. He heard a voice, a nostalgic one, the one he always yearned for. Her voice came. For me. Leonis, Rose. Lea. He couldn't see anything. Leonis reached out, his hands groping through the infinite darkness. His fingers caught nothing, however. I'm right here, always, always by your side. That's why. Leonis. Hurry. And find me. Leonis awoke. LNG. He sat up, rubbing his eyelids. His hair was messy and stood on end. No matter how much Leonis tried to stave it off with sheer willpower, his 10-year-old body required sleep. And it seemed he'd grown weary after eating. It's been a while since I dreamed of her. Leonis shook his head slowly and got up. Dawn had yet to break. The magical campfire was still burning. Leonis turned around, feeling a gaze on him. Rives was squatting down next to him, peering closely. What are you doing? he exclaimed in surprise. Seeing the undead king slumber so innocently is a rare sight. What's more, you were mumbling in your sleep? You were cute, Leo. See? Vra said, smiling impishly from the other side of the campfire. She held up Leonie's terminal, which displayed a photo of him sleeping. Gee, give that back. Leonie flushed and snatched the device out of the Dragon Lord's hand. Vra giggled, got to her feet, and extinguished the magical fire. We should set out before dawn, she said. Right. Leonie nodded bitterly and reached for the Staff of Sealed Sins, which he had leaned against a rock. No sooner had he done so, however, than the Staff of Sealed Sins let out a high-pitched sound, resonating with something. What? Leonie stared at the rod in surprise. He realized it wasn't the staff, but the goddess's demon sword, Dainsleif, sheathed within. What is this? The sound of the resonance wasn't dying down, and suddenly, Leonie heard a voice in his mind. You have come. My dear. Child. You kept. Your promise. Leo. What's wrong? What's happened? Vra and Rives looked confused. Roselia, huh? I heard. Roselia's voice. Leonie grabbed the Staff of Sealed Sins and looked intuitively in the direction of the voice, a mountain range stretching out at the end of the wasteland. It's coming from that direction. What do you mean? You heard the goddess's voice. Vra pressed while flying through the darkness. I don't know. However, the demon sword is definitely resonating with her, Leonie answered from atop the skull dragon. Roselia hadn't spoken to him since reaching out at the camp. Yet the Staff of Sealed Sins still hummed in his grip. Dainsleif reacted once before, in the ruined city, when he saw the Holy Woman of the Six Heroes, Tyrese Resurrectia. The Holy Woman hadn't been Roselia's true reincarnation but had harbored some aspect of the goddess. So why did the demon sword respond now, in this other world? The three Dark Lords crossed the sword-like spires of the mountain range and discovered that a vast forest lay beyond. So this world has forests, too, Leonie remarked. But this place, Rives whispered. Yes, Leonie replied. It's dead. The woods beneath them were polluted with void miasma, and there were no signs of life. However, the trees seemed to writhe, as though the forest had become a void itself. Leo, look at that. Vra called out. There are ruins down there. Leonie used a farsight spell to follow Vra's gaze. Between the dead timbers and the deathly fog was a crumbling, stonework fortress. Trees coiled around it, digging into the remains. Leonie could scarcely believe his eyes. But wait, that can't be true. He cried. He recognized this decrepit structure. What's wrong, Undead King? Rives asked him. That's the Lord of the Beasts Gazeth Hellbeast's Ironblood Castle. What? In the depths of boundless darkness, where the flow of time stood still, the Void King hailed as a hero in ancient times awakened from sleep. His rousing was an unexpected one. The injuries he'd sustained from the last battle had yet to heal fully, and he was meant to slumber for a while longer. However, he heard her voice, the voice of his nemesis, the goddess. Roch. The Void King's howl tore through the darkness. Gazeth Hellbeast, the Lord of Beasts. He was the destructive master at the Dark Lord's army's 3rd Division, the Demon Beast Corps, and fought personally on the front lines. Gazeth's stronghold was built in a key location for the conquest of the human kingdom and was the Dark Lord's army's greatest fortification. Yet even it was lost during the war's final days. Thanks to a coordinated attack by the 6 heroes, the Lord of Beasts himself dueled the Sword Master, and although he perished, his demise befitted a Dark Lord. Standing before the remains of the now ruined Ironblood Castle, Leonie gasped. There's no mistaking it. This is the Lord of Beasts' fortress. The moss-covered walls had collapsed and were now half submerged into the ground. Still, Leonie was certain this was Ironblood Castle, for he'd visited it many times as an ally. So that's what it looked like. Vra, who had returned to her humanoid form, said. Gazeth's castle, huh? She seemed to be confused by this sight. Admittedly, Leonie wasn't faring much better. What's going on? Isn't this supposed to be a different world? Why were ruins from 1,000 years ago, from Leonie's era, in a place like this. Maybe we didn't traverse dimensions, but were simply thrown to some other part of our own world? It was possible, but Leonie's found that unlikely. The blood-colored sky and desolate land covered in void miasma felt too different from home. Rives cocked her head. This is incomprehensible. Let's just go inside for the time being, Vra decided, taking a light step and then shattering the crumbled walls with a loud kick. Unlike the exterior facade, the castle's interior had maintained much of its original form. The kingdom's allied forces had stormed these halls and likely sought to use the structure as their frontline base rather than destroy it. Humans might have used it for centuries after it was seized. Parts of the stone showed signs of repair. A few spots on the walls still emit mana, too, Leonie's noticed. Maybe that was why the degradation inside wasn't as severe. Is this where the Lord of Beasts died? Rives asked. No, after Ironblood Castle fell, Gazeth Hellbeast challenged the Swordmaster to a duel on the Bloodfang Plains, where they supposedly perished. I see. If their remains were here, I would have liked to take them with us. If there were any bones around, I'd claim them for my own, Leonie's insisted. I'd love nothing more than to have the Lord of the Beasts skeleton for my collection. He considered going to the Bloodfang Plains for them, but now wasn't the time for it. The staff of sealed sins was still resonating in his hand. It felt like the deeper they advanced into the castle, the stronger the reaction. Is it Roselia? Leonie's produced a flame at the tip of his rod, illuminating the passage leading under the castle. Why was the demon sword reacting to something that resided in another dimension? And how had Ironblood Castle come to rest here? I have to catch Azrael and get answers out of him. After descending deep underground, the three Dark Lords came to a giant gate. It was closed shut and sealed firmly with sorcery for good measure. Leonie's held up the staff of sealed sins against the gate, realizing that the resonance grew more intense when he did. He ran his fingers over the walls, analyzing the sorcery used there. Sealing magic, and it's not the work of the Lord of Beasts from what I can tell, Leonie's remarked. The spell possessed multiple layers, and as Leonie's drew a symbol to undo it. This is taking too long. Hi-ah, Dragon Lord / Vra suddenly kicked the door. Whoosh, the gigantic barricade was blown away and shattered with a thundering noise. A cloud of dust blew into the air, obfuscating the way forward. That's barbaric, Vra, Leonie's chided her. Dragons hate dawdling. Vra shrugged. On this matter, we are in agreement, Rives said. The three Dark Lords looked past the door, ? The cloud of dust cleared, revealing a pitch-black crystal pyramid that reflected no light. A goddess temple? It wasn't anywhere near as big as the one in Necrozoa's underground temple. It was about as large as a casket. A goddess temple was a device the Dark Lord's armies used to receive the goddess's prophecies. Now, this is curious, Rives whispered. What is a goddess temple doing here? I'm not sure, Leonie's replied. There was a goddess temple in every Dark Lord's army's base, and that included Ironblood Castle. Of course, however, the Human Alliance army destroyed all the ones they came across as they claimed locations during the war. All the temples were annihilated save the one hidden in Necrozoa. There shouldn't have been one here. Maybe the devil of the underworld created this altar, Rives suggested. Leonie's nodded. Yes, that's possible. Azrael was devoted to Roselia, so it wouldn't have been too strange to learn they'd built a new one. But I still have to wonder what Ironblood Castle is doing here. Indeed. Leonie's took a step forward and touched the surface of the black crystal. The demon sword contained inside the staff of sealed sins reacted violently. In response, the black crystal released a flash, followed by a voice. What? Leonie's wasn't the only one who'd heard it, either. Rives and Vru acknowledged static-laden words echoing from every direction. The black crystal flickered again. The barely intelligible voice echoed through the chamber. The demon sword in Leonie's hands hummed in concert. Why? I thought you had disappeared from this world. Greater than. I disappeared. Leonie's whispered, dumbfounded. What are you saying? Who are you? His shout drowned out the strange, garbled speaker. It couldn't possibly be her. The goddess had perished long ago, to be reincarnated into a human body 1,000 years later. Yet against all logic, Leonie's believed this voice to be hers. When Zemin activated the goddess temple in Necrozoa, Dainsleif hadn't responded like this. Therefore, this speaker had to be someone else who'd assumed the goddess's identity. Surely, that was it. Yet Leonis knew on instinct that this was no pretender. It was definitely her. This voice from the black crystal kept repeating the word with maddened, yearning desire. Roselia. Is it really you? Leonis whispered, voice tense. He reached out for the crystal like she was truly there. My beloved child, successor to the demon sword. I've always waited for you. Please. You must find me. Greater than. Roselia. I'm here. I'm right here. Leonis couldn't help but shout. He beat his hand against the pyramid repeatedly. Roselia. Vra grabbed his arm. Leo, something's wrong. What? The Dragon Lord's alarmed expression helped Leonis calm down. The goddess's voice changed suddenly. Black mist bled from the crystal, surrounding Leonis's hands. What? He pulled away, assailed by a terrible sensation, like his soul was beginning to fester. Void miasma? The vapor coiled around his arms, climbing up to his neck slowly. Celia. Leonis moaned. Ha! Vra cried, slamming her fist against the goddess temple. A crack ran through its obsidian surface, and it shattered with a loud, clear sound. Vra, what did you do? Leonis shouted, not immediately aware of how loud he'd spoken. The Dragon Lord didn't pay it much mind. However, staring at her fellow Dark Lord. Leo, your hand. She stared at Leonis's arm. What? Is this? The places where the miasma had touched Leonis's right hand were inflamed as though from a burn, and a strange pattern formed on his arm. A sharp, burning pain ran through his skin. It looks like a hex, Rives stated while examining the marking. A hex? Rives frowned, observing it closely. Yes. I've never seen such a pattern before, though. The crushed remains of the goddess temple were beginning to lose their glow. Let's get out of here for the time being, Vra said. I can't say I like the air of this place. I am in agreement, Rives added. She picked up a black fragment. For now, I'll take this back with us. Wait, something *s. Coming. Leonis called. He spoke entirely out of intuition. Every cell in his body shrieked in alarm. This feeling, no, it can't be. Is it really him? The Dragon Lord and Lord of the Seas noticed the presence at the same time. What? This is? They looked up to the ceiling. And the moment they did, crash! Ironblood Castle was utterly erased. Chapter 7, The Void King. The air wavered from the sheer heat. Bits of flame smoldered at the edge of the miasma forest. The site of Ironblood Castle was now a gigantic crater, a spear at its center. A single spear had destroyed the entire area. The three Dark Lords stood a short distance from the point of impact, a dome-shaped barrier surrounding them. Had that been a direct hit, I don't think my spell would have managed to block it, Leonis said, holding up the Staff of Sealed Sins. Is that a spear? Vra asked. I sense a vast amount of mana coming from it, Rives whispered, fascinated. This seems to be a weapon of the gods. Remnants of stone walls littered the blasted ground. The goddess temple had been eradicated. Bryonak, the divine spear. Only he is capable of throwing such a weapon. Leonis turned his attention to the sky. Shining within the fathom. Lestark was a gigantic, grotesque form. The Void King floated overhead, countless voids waiting upon him. So fate has led us to meet again. Leonis glared at the fallen hero. My teacher, Shardark the Sword Master. Shardark? Vra's golden eyes shut wide. Leo, what do you mean? Is that really the Sword Master at the Six Heroes? Leonis nodded, feeling a bead of cold sweat slide down his neck. Shardark Shinignis, a Void Lord who commanded the Voids. His form had changed since the clash in the Seventh Assault Garden. After absorbing gods and demons, he became a malformed monster. His lower half had swelled, sprouting 8 legs, each belonging to a different creature. Likewise, 8 hands had grown from his upper half, each wielding a mythology-class weapon. The only part of this terrifying living nightmare that still bore any resemblance to the man he was once was his pale, handsome face. However, one of his eyes was crushed, the remnants of an injury Leonis had inflicted. What is he doing here? The Sword Master had descended upon the 7th Assault Garden as a Void Lord to fuse with the Sigura Orchid Guardian deity. After a fierce battle with Leones, he'd retreated into a tear in space when Leones had awakened to the power of his holy sword and shot him between the eyes. So if he's here after disappearing into that fracture in reality, it seemed Leones' hypothesis that the voids originated from this world was correct. That was a major piece of information about the otherwise completely unknown creatures. Now's hardly the time to celebrate that, though. Leones raised the Staff of Sealed Sins. That is definitely the Sword Master at the 6 Heroes. After succumbing to the emptiness and becoming the Void Lord, he's been indiscriminately fusing with any being he's deemed worthy. Shardak Shinignis? Vra growled, her voice thick with bloodlust. Her draconic golden eyes glinted menacingly. Hundreds of her dragons had perished at this hero's hands. What is the Sword Master doing here? Rives inquired calmly. I don't know. Had this fallen hero been drawn by the goddess's voice? Or perhaps it was a result of Dainslif's resonance? Shardak Void Lord's howl shook the air. Here he comes. Leones shouted. Whoosh! The Sword Master's gigantic form descended like a comet, blasting another, smaller crater into the earth. 8th Order Gravity Spell, Vira's UO. VNNNNN. A sphere of gravity formed in the air, flattening the Sword Master against the ground, but that was all it accomplished. Even the strongest gravity spell could only momentarily stall him. I'll crush you with one blow, Dragzelga. Wintertide of Swords, Frozen Blades of Demonic Ice, Shurianos. Vra chanted a spell in the dragon tongue while Vra cast an 8th Order Ice spell, a spiraling force that dug into the ground and a storm of whirling ice blades enveloped the Sword Master's gigantic body. The maelstrom of the Dark Lord's powers blew away the surrounding voids in an instant. Even the strongest of the 6 heroes can't hope to face 3 Dark Lords at once. What? Vra's confident smile faded swiftly. Shardak swung one of his arms, brushing away the dust around him with a massive hammer, a mythology-class weapon. He hurled the hammer effortlessly. No ordinary defensive spell could block it. Come forth from the shadows, cadavers of the realm of shadows. Great death wall. Countless bones reinforced by mana assembled to form a thick wall of bones. This was an original spell of the Undead Kings, which didn't exist in the magic system. However, the spinning mallet broke through each layer of the barricade, speeding toward Leones. My precious bones. Before Leones had time to lament the loss, the great hammer was upon him. Drag fist. Vra threw a punch charged with mana, which smashed against the mallet's side and knocked it off course. It raced past Leones, barely missing his face, and slammed into the ground with a thunderous noise. What a monster! Just knocking it aside took all I had. And that's after the bone wall dampened so much of its momentum. He's more powerful than he ever was in life, Leones said. And sorcery hardly affects him, too, Rives pointed out. Indeed. Leones nodded. Shardak couldn't use sorcery in life. He was focused purely on swordsmanship, but by evolving, he absorbed gods capable of wielding holy magic. He'd blocked Vra and Rives' onslaught with a holy spell. My old teacher. You once called me a monster for becoming the Undead King, but you have become more monstrous than I ever was. Leones scowled. Had the 3 Dark Lords been at their full strength, they would have destroyed this pest effortlessly. But the strongest of them, the Lord of the Seas, had lost her other half, the Leviathan. Leones was in a 10-year-old's body, reducing his physical prowess and cutting his mana to a third of its original capacity. Donning blackers in his black tyrant form would help, but he couldn't summon his brother-in-arms from the realm of shadows right now. The only one who could manage a decent fight was Vra, the Dragon Lord, but even in her case, her attacks were primarily magical in nature, making her ill-suited to face the Sword Master, and a dragon's innate spell resistance was nearly meaningless against Shardak. We need to retreat, but turning our backs on him won't be wise. Leones didn't feel that knowing when to flee besmirched a Dark Lord's honor. After all, it was only through countless defeats that the Undead King had found the path to supremacy. Unfortunately, retreating here would be too risky. If they tried, one of the 3 Dark Lords, Leones, Vra, or Rives, would surely be slain. Besides, while Leonis didn't see fleeing as disgraceful, the Dragon Lord and the Lord of the Seas might be too proud to run. The Void King roared and charged toward them. With his 8 legs, stolen from gods and devils, he kicked away the remnants of Ironblood Castle. His every step a thunderclap. "Leo, I'll stall him, so cover for me," Vra said with a ferocious smile before shifting into her true form. Gra! A gigantic crimson dragon appeared, enveloped in crimson flames, and met the Swordmaster's charge. Thud! The collision sent a shockwave radiating out in every direction. Dirt blew into the air, forcing Leonis to shield his face from the debris. Grappling her opponent head-on, Vra parted her jaws and exhaled sizzling dragon breath at point-blank range. The red flames consumed Shardark's upper half. His divine protection didn't trigger. The dragon's claws tore into the Swordmaster's flesh. Despite being struck directly and exposed to the incandescent fire, the Swordmaster refused to stop. He used the great shield he carried to slam the red dragon's head, knocking her back. Shardark hurled a great sword. Shirashis. A blade of water lanced from the distance, severing Shardark's fingers. "We're hunting big game here. We must attack it from 3 directions." Rives called out as she flew through the air. Leonis sprinted along the ground, chanting an advanced spell. "If only I could use the demon sword, I'd be able to defeat him." Dainsleif remained locked within the staff, unstirring. Shardark had absorbed one of the Dark Lords, and owing to the oath Leonis had made with the goddess, he was unable to wield Dainsleif's power against one of his fellow Dark Lords. "The demon sword isn't my only trump card." But, as he raced through the wasteland, Leonis unintentionally clenched his right hand. His holy sword, Excalibur 20, Leonis had manifested that unknown power once before to defeat Shardark Void Lord. It wasn't a power he could use freely, however. Much like Dainsleif, it consumed all his mana and stamina, so he could fire it only in all-or-nothing situations. "Ye who consume life, I offer my soul as a sacrifice to beckon you." Skull Colossus. The shattered bones scattered on the ground clattered and writhed, converging before Leonis. They came together, forming a 30-melt-tall sculpture made of bone. "It's delightful, looking down upon my teacher like this." Leonis smiled viciously, sitting atop the construct's hand. He gazed below at Shardark, who was still grappling with the red dragon. "Holy sword, Excalibur 20. Activate." Leonis chanted the words while focusing on his fingertips. Particles of light converged, manifesting to form a holy sword shaped like a pistol. Yet not a moment later, black sparks shot from his right hand. Pain ran through Leonis's body, and the half-manifested holy sword dispersed. "What?" Leonis grimaced and looked down at his hand. The strange pattern Rives called a hex surfaced on his skin. "Has it sealed my holy sword?" Leonis tried to manifest the holy sword again with no success. Shardark slammed Vra into the ground and charged at the bone construct. TSK, 10th order spell, Meld Gears. Boosh! A pillar of white-hot flames erupted, burning through the night, but it did nothing to stop Shardark's advance. "That accursed monster!" Leonis raised his hand, and a moment later, chains shot out of the darkness, coiling around Shardark. This was one of the Arc 7, a Dark Lord slaying weapon created by the gods, the Vile Dragon Fetter, Ragvazol. These chains had stopped Vra's rampage. In the capital when she went berserk, and the Arc 7 were exceptionally potent against Dark Lords. Additionally, Ragvazol had a curse that made it stronger against dragons. The binds stopped Shardark's charge. "I knew it." Shardark had fused with more than just a Dark Lord. As one of the 6 heroes, he was blessed by the luminous powers and had emerged with countless forms of life to achieve continual evolution. Naturally, he'd sought to acquire a dragon at some point. And as Shardark froze in place, Gra fired a beam of argent heat at him. While Rives cast a 9th order ice spell from above, the demon frost blizzard, healed burst forth. Darkness, Azam. Leonis followed up with a flurry of 10th order spells. Boom, 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 boom. Destructive mana exploded, illuminating the world like a sun at noon. The many attacks from the trio of Dark Lords silenced the Void King. He stood amid roaring, crimson fire. his body grievously wounded. Crack. A fissure ran through space. Question mark. Crack, crack, crack. The fractures expanded swiftly, swallowing up the nearby area in no time. Leonis swallowed nervously. Did we do it? They certainly hadn't dealt a fatal wound. The Void King wasn't going to perish from this. However, during the fight in the 7th Assault Garden, Shardak retreated into a tear in reality after being shot by Leonis's holy sword. Maybe he couldn't maintain his form after taking a certain degree of damage. Or perhaps there was a time limit to how long he could fight. Crack. Crack. Oh, Leonis said ironically, raising an eyebrow. I'm surprised you can still speak, my teacher. Crash, clink, crunch. Shardak blew the chains of Ragvazol away. What are you saying? Undead King. I'm preparing a powerful attack. Stall him for me, Rives declared from above. Do you understand what you're asking of me? Leonis grumbled from atop the bone sculpture. Rives's water mantle shone, and a half-transparent sphere of water surrounded her body. Shardak howled, swinging Ragvazol around. TCH, the chains bashed against the Skull Colossus, shattering its arm to bits. The Skull Colossus is a siege weapon. How can it shatter it this easily? Having been knocked off the sculpture, Leonis reflexively cast a gravity spell to descend safely to the ground. Gigantic chunks of bone rained from above. He'd hoped the construct would provide a distraction while he fired his holy sword, but that plan failed. If Leonis had had Blackers with him, he'd have been able to fight another way. There was also his third minion, still locked within the realm of shadows. Although that was a perilous option, I never counted on not being able to manifest my holy sword. Though, Leonis glanced at his right hand. He couldn't see the hex pattern, but it wasn't gone yet. Leonis was an expert when it came to curses, but this was no ordinary magic. He'd never seen a pattern like it before. What a nuisance. Clicking his tongue, Leonis bolted through the darkness. He didn't have to try to sense Shardak's presence, given that his giant form shook the ground with every step. The evil rending sword, Zolgstar Mazekis. Leonis turned round and swung his arm, calling upon the realm of shadows. Several dozen blades emerged from thin air, lancing towards Shardak. These were copies made from fragments of one of the Arc 7. Their power was inferior to the original, but they were still effective against Dark Lords. However, clang! Shardak swept away the flurry of blades with a single stroke of his broadsword. And then, much to Leonis's surprise, he caught a few of them to wield as his own. No weaponry is effective against him. Even after being reduced to a void monstrosity, Shardak's authority as one of the 6 heroes, granted to him by the luminous powers, remained in effect. His ability to wield all armaments in the world extended even to the Arc 7. Blue fire billowed out of Shardak's soul eye, which remained fixed upon Leonis. He swung Zolgstar Mazekis's blades down on the boy. No spell could meet this attack. Grah! A massive red dragon closed its giant jaws on Shardak's arm, crushing it. Feel the vengeance of the demon dragon's mountain range's dragons. The mighty creature's claws, wreathed in flames, tore through the Void King's hardened skin. Black miasma gushed like blood. Shardak swung down the Arc 7 swords, thrusting them into Vra's neck, but her dragon scales deflected them easily. You underestimate the Dragon Lord if you think you can harm me with imitations. Vra roared, her tail flailing like a whip to strike at Shardak's body. The sword master lost balance, his massive form crumpling to the ground. Seizing upon that chance, hear my roar, fool, Dark Dragray. Vra sank her claws into Shardak, undoing his divine protection. As she spoke a spell in the dragon tongue, Boosh, before Vra could attack again. Grah! She roared out in agony. Shardak's arm emerged from the fire, tearing off one of the Dragon Lord's wings. Shardak rose up and grabbed the dragon by one of its horns. He then used another arm to try driving a lance through her throat. Vra! Leonis cried. That's long enough. Beware, Dragon Lord. You might get caught up in this. Leonis heard Rives state. HMPH. You certainly took your time. Vra reverted to her humanoid form to escape the Swordmaster. Frozen souls, slumber in the Eternal Palace, Reserva Cositas. A prismatic shining barrier of ice pushed against Shardark's gigantic form. Rives invoked a powerful, highly advanced 11th order limit break spell. This was magic unique to sea sprites. It allowed them to trap targets within an ice block formed of mana, forcing the captive into an eternal slumber. Shardark's spell resistance was powerless in the face of this magic. The ice barrier held him in place. However, the triumph was only momentary. Shardark's soul continued to burn and glow within the ice block's absolute zero environment. If the three Dark Lords didn't capitalize on this opening, they would lose their chance at striking down the Void King. Leonis was already prepared to chant the spell. Vro had risked herself to give the time needed, and Rives provided the moment to loose it. Leonis couldn't afford to let this opportunity go to waste. He pointed the tip of the Staff of Sealed Sins at Shardark, focusing his mana into it. Hark the song of ruin. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The tragedy that returns all to its origin, once again, descends upon us solemnly. Leonis hadn't chanted a limit break spell, a spell of the 11th order and above, since reincarnating. Spells of that level required longer chants, meaning there weren't many chances to use them in live combat. However, the greater reason he'd avoided casting one was the strain using so much mana would have on his current body. No ordinary spell will work on him, though. Leonis gritted his teeth. Intense sparks flickered from the tip of the staff in his hands. NGHR, the discharge of mana burned at his fingertips. Every nerve in his body screamed out in pain. As I suspected, this form can't handle it. Slender fingers slid over Leonis's. I'll lend you my mana, Leo. Vra said, standing behind him with a smile. Leonis's mana circulated through Vra and then into his staff. The rod shone, overflowing with magical power. May my rage burn the world away, hastening the time of ruin. Just as the ice barrier encasing Shardark shattered. 11th order destruction spell, Meld Magnus. Destructive light covered the world. A swarm of voids that emerged from a tear in space evaporated instantly. And crack, crack, crack. The cracks around Shardark Void Lord multiplied. Leo.Nis? Within the surging red flames, the Void Lord called his name. Are you the successor? For a moment, Leonis thought he saw his teacher's eye regain the intellect it possessed when it still belonged to a hero. Shardark reached out, as though to grasp something, then vanished into a tear in space. Crack, crack, crack. The fracture that swallowed Shardark began to eat into the ground. It grew, threatening to swallow the sky. The world was breaking, transformed into a shattered palace of glass. Leonis's eyes widened in alarm as he peered overhead. Could it be? Leo, we have to run. What are you dawdling for? At this rate, we'll be overtaken. Vra and Rives both warned him, yet Leonis stayed put and spoke with conviction. We should let it. It's probably, Leo. The canopy of the sky crumbled. And the world inverted. The surroundings changed immediately. Leonis shook his head lightly and looked around. He wasn't in the crater where Ironblood Castle had stood, but in a forest full of dense trees. Sunlight was beginning to color the dim sky. Where are we? Vra whispered behind him. Turning around, Leonis saw the crimson-haired girl eyeing him with a confused expression. Were we thrown to another world again? She asked. No, this is probably our original one, Leonis replied. I saw the stars through the crack in space. Stars? Yes. Leonis nodded and glanced up at the sky visible through the forest canopy. The star of calamity shone ominously as the heavens grew bright. Entering that fracture in reality had been a gamble, but we managed to find a way back. They'd failed to pursue the devil of the underworld, but there was little alternative. Undead King, where did the Swordmaster disappear to? Rives descended from the air, her water mantle fluttering. If he's not here, then perhaps he used the tear to travel elsewhere, Leonis replied, shaking his head. The voids likely used those fractures to freely traverse dimensions, but if that was the case, it made no sense that they appeared and disappeared so irregularly, like fog. If the voids could move so easily, humanity would have been driven to extinction by now. Why did the Swordmaster at the Six Heroes? Why did he appear there? Good question. I don't know. Shardak had definitely reacted to the goddess's voice, but what he'd come there to do was unclear. Maybe he'd long since lost all sense of purpose and had gone mad from the emptiness eating away at his soul, and so he'd been drawn to this remnant of his old nemesis. What was that world? Rives muttered. A red sky, a wasteland that expanded endlessly, swarms of countless voids. Leonis speculated that world was the source of the voids, but what were the ruins of the Lord of Beasts' citadel doing there? And why did he hear the voice of the deceased goddess? Leonis reflexively gripped the staff of sealed sins. The devil of the underworld and Duke Crystalia. The azure hold. The void world. The goddess's voice. The Iron Blood Castle ruins that shouldn't have been there. Something connected all these pieces. Azrael must have the answer. For now, Leonis was back in his world, and another matter demanded his attention. I can't leave my kingdom unattended for long. It wouldn't do to leave Blackers and Shari in charge of everything. Leonis thought of his minion. It had been only a few days, yet he felt oddly wistful. I did promise. After all. Leonis retrieved his terminal from his pocket. All right. Where are we? He tried activating the device, but it didn't provide any information on the surrounding area. The magical apparatuses of this era weren't of much use unless they were within range of an assault garden. If you're looking for a human city, you'll find one that way, Vra said, pointing toward the dawn. Are you certain? Leonis asked. Of course I am, the Dragon Lord replied, grinning and placing her hands on her waist. Dragons fly by watching the positions of the stars. How far is it? Well, I don't know that much. I see. Leonis nodded. Then I must return to the capital. I'm wary of Azrael's plans, but I have a promise to keep. I bet that minion of yours is worried about you, Vra teased. I will go after the devil of the underworld, Rives decided. I must reclaim my Leviathan. Me too. He still has the Azure hold. Though for all we know, Azrael and the Azure hold aren't in this world at all, Vra remarked. If his objective is to collect the Dark Lords, he will have to return. Knowing as much, we should inspect the lands where the remaining Dark Lords slumber. True. You're right. I will seek the Lord of Beasts' resting place. Okay. Let us know if you find anything. Leonis summoned his skull dragon from the realm of shadows and hopped onto its back. Don't be careless. There's no telling what Azrael might be planning. He warned the other two. HMPH. I'll reduce him to ashes next time, Vra declared. The skull dragon flapped its wings and took off toward the sun. It was evening. Having finished her exercises for the day, Rizelia returned to her room in the hotel, where she changed out of her training outfit and into her underwear. She collapsed on the sofa. I think I'm done for. She whined most uncharacteristically, her hair disheveled. Normally, Rizelia wouldn't act so undisciplined, even with no one watching, but she was utterly exhausted from multiple days of rigorous training. On top of the 18th Platoon's team practice sessions, which Rizelia herself had scheduled, she also had to spend every morning and evening suffering through special lessons. Worse yet, her instructor was quite unforgiving. Rizelia had improved at handling the true ancestor's dress and controlling her mana circulation, but she couldn't say by how much or if it would matter. Lying atop the sofa, Rizelia fidgeted in place uneasily, turning around to look up at the mana lamp lighting the room. When's Leo coming back? She muttered. 4 days had passed since he left the capital. She'd messaged him on each one but never received a reply. Rizelia kept a cup of pudding in the fridge, waiting for him in case he returned. Leo. Rizelia played with the sofa's buttons, pushing them in. She grabbed a cushion she used as a pillow and sank her fangs into it. With puffed-up cheeks, she decided, not good enough. Rizelia was frustrated. She tossed and turned on the sofa, still hugging the cushion. Eventually, her eyes settled on the half-open window. The curtain danced from the soft breeze. Outside, the sun was sinking, and the casino's neon lights were sparking to life. The girl stared vacantly at the fluttering curtain. He'd been gone for only a few days, but she missed him desperately. Once Leo comes back, I'm going to suck a whole lot of blood from him. Rizelia hugged the cushion tightly. Her mana sizzled, making her heart throb. Ba-dump, ba-dump, ba-dump. Huh? I am feeling, kind of, huh? Thinking about him made her cheeks flush. No. Leo is, well, he's 10 years old. That's not. Ryselia's heart beat like a drum, and she felt her face grow hot, exclamation mark. The doorknob clicked. Leo? Ryzelia sat up at once. Sorry, I'm not the kid, it's your favorite maid, Lady Celia. The door opened, revealing Regina in a maid's uniform. She struck a strange, cute pose, her twin tails bobbing. Oh, it's just you, Regina. Ryselia's shoulders slumped in plain disappointment. You know, Lady Celia, that reaction kind of breaks my heart, Regina muttered dispassionately. No. I'm sorry. I'm glad you're here, Regina. The maid shrugged. Fine. I'll forgive you. Anyway, it's time for the meeting. Oh, right. I'll go prepare. Ryzelia got off the sofa and hurriedly changed into her uniform. As she put on her skirt, she looked out the window again. No one was there. Of course. There was only the gently billowing curtain. Leo. A petite shadow stood atop the Shangri-La Resort's rooftop. Shari had dropped her Leonese disguise and was in her usual maid's attire. My lord. Her hands were together, as though in prayer, while she watched the setting sun. Whenever Leonese went out to battle, Shari waited on Deathhold's balcony to wish for her master's safety. She was confident of his victory. But that didn't mean she wasn't concerned. After all, at present, her master was in the vessel of a child, and his opponent this time is the Lord of the Seas, touted as the strongest Dark Lord. Even with all her faith in Leonese and his powers, Shari couldn't help but wonder if he would return unscathed this time. Are you worried for Lord Magnus? A calm voice inquired. Shari turned around, her gaze settling on a black wolf with golden eyes, standing in the shadow of the setting sun. Lord Blackers. Blackers stood alongside Shari, turning his eyes to the horizon. My friend is sure to return to his kingdom. All we can do is believe in him, he said. Yes, you're right. Shari bowed her head reverently. Incidentally, Shari, should Lord Magnus be late for the Holy Sword Dance Festival, it will fall to you to attend as his body double. She nodded. I've made the necessary preparations. Shari had studied the rules thoroughly in preparation. A human combat festival was child's play to one with the skills of a septentrian assassin. She could win in a manner that wasn't too spectacular or lose in a way that wasn't too crushing. The girl didn't intend to throw the match, but she wasn't planning on actively fighting. A needless show of her strength would attract undue attention to Leonese. I hope nothing happens, but the trifling fools who get in Lord Magnus's way time and again might take advantage of the celebration. Bear that in mind. Yes, understood. The Voids weren't the only mysterious faction in this world. Past officers of the Dark Lord's armies, like Nefakes and Zamin, had reappeared in this era, and conspired against Leonese. Shari herself had been attacked and suffered an embarrassing defeat at the hands of one of their demonic assassins. I won't let it happen again. With resolve in heart, Shari touched the ring in her pocket. Leonese had given it to her. It was capable of summoning the strongest being in the Dark Lord's armies. She'd used it once already, so the magic had faded, but it was still a dear treasure. My lord, please be safe, Shari prayed, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The days in Camelot came and went. The special training intensified as the Holy Sword Dance Festival approached. Fortunately, everyone showed clear signs of improving and maturing. Before long, the day of the event arrived. Chapter 8. The Holy Sword Dance Festival. It was 10:30 Imperial Standard Time, the day of the Holy Sword Dance Festival. The members of the 18th Platoon boarded a large, self-driving vehicle that transported them to the stage of the festival in the 8th Assault Garden. Since the 8th Assault Garden was still under construction, its surface area was only a third of the 7th Assault Garden's. It had 2 cutting-edge mana furnaces as its energy source, and upon completion, it was set to boast the highest mobility of all its kind. Construction is currently at 78%. But since they'll need to divert resources to repairing the 7th Assault Garden, it'll take 2 more years for it to be completed, Elfine said from the seat opposite Ryselia's. It already looks pretty much done, though, Regina noted as she looked out the window. The vehicle was driving through Area 3, passing by many large buildings. They were all deserted, and it reminded Ryzelia of the Third Assault Garden. Despite this being an unpopulated city, destroying any structures outside the designated combat area would mean a loss of points. This rule put Regina at a disadvantage, since her Holy Sword's drag blast attack was a wide-area bombardment, but the regulations were based on real urban combat, so there was nothing to be done. "Where are we headed?" Ryzelia asked. "It's pretty far from the central garden," Elfine replied, tapping her terminal. Each unit participating in the Holy Sword Dance Festival had a designated starting spot. These positions were kept secret from the participants. Each site in a team's area had core flags in place, and by stealing them, a rival unit would score points, and the defending one would lose points. A team member was disqualified when knocked unconscious or if their holy sword was destroyed. Baiting enemies out using the core flags would be a helpful strategy. The game area appeared to be vast and included underground passages. However, as time passed, float blocks would be detached from the game area, and partitions would descend to seal off underground passages. The constantly shrinking game area would force a conflict even if a team tried to run around with a core flag and remain elusive. The vehicle drove past the urban area and got on a highway. Ryzelia looked up at the blue sky. Leo. He hadn't made it back in time. The one seated next to her right now was his body double. "You want a sweet, kid?" Sakuya asked. "Yes, please." Sakuya pulled a castella from her sleeve, which the body double gladly accepted. "Is the faker worried about Leo, too?" Ryzelia wondered. "Miss Fine, has the broadcast started already?" she asked. "Yes. There are drones scattered around the city. The machines were controlled by artificial elementals, which used the astral garden to transmit what each team was doing to large screens in each assault garden." The vehicle continued out of the urban area and entered an underground tunnel. Finally it came to a stop before a gigantic supply silo, and a voice played from inside the vehicle. "Arrived at Point E. Members of the 18th Platoon are to stay put until they receive the signal marking the opening of the Holy Sword Dance Festival. The seats for invited guests should be around here." Al turned her head this way and that. She had the ticket Sakuya gave her clutched in one hand. She was in a spectator stadium set up on Excalibur Academy's premises. The arena was open to all citizens. The large screens used for student matches would instead show the festival activities. There weren't usually many spectators here, but the Holy Sword Dance Festival had brought people out in droves. "This place is even more crowded than the Rogner's Kingdom's marketplace. It's making me dizzy." Arl was bad with crowds and longed for the sacred tranquility of the spirit forest. Honestly, she wanted to leave but refused to let Sakuya's ticket go to waste. "Besides, I would like to see how the strongest warriors of this era fight." It took a while, but Arl finally found a seat. Yet just as she went to sit, she spotted a familiar child a few rows ahead. "Is that Tessera? What is she doing here?" The young girl was from an orphanage Arl had eaten at once. She was walking along a passage in front of the many rows of chairs, unsure where to go. "You there, girl?" Tessera turned around, surprised. "Miss Al?" Her eyes widened upon seeing a familiar face. Arl motioned for Tessera to approach, and she did. "Hello," she greeted her with a polite bow of her head. "Did you come to watch the festival, too, Miss Al? I suppose." "I am curious about this," Al replied, using a finger to play with her ponytail. "Is that why you're here?" "Yes, Big Sis Ryzelia gave me a ticket, but I can't find my seat." Tessera retrieved her ticket from a pocket, showing it to Al. "Let me have a look, I can help with your search." Al inspected the printed number. "Isn't this?" "Yes, it's the chair next to mine." "It is?" Sakuya was in the same unit as that Ryzelia girl, so it followed they'd received tickets for adjacent spots. Al and Tessera bought popcorn and drinks from a passing trolley and settled in. "Did you come here alone?" "No one's watching you?" "No, I'm here by myself. I come to watch the matches here all the time." "I see. 1,000 years ago, even in relatively peaceful countries like the Rogner's Kingdom, abductors wandered the outskirts of the cities. A girl walking about unsupervised was unthinkable. However, things were different in the 7th Assault Garden. And this was Excalibur Academy, likely the safest place in the city. Although technically, I am in a criminal organization. Remembering that made Al gloomy. She joined to learn the Dark Lord Solvadus's identity, but she'd since become the Demon Wolf Pack's designated bodyguard. The screen displayed each school's representatives. How does this work, exactly? Do they use spirits or familiars to project this image through some kind of farsight sorcery? It boggled Al's mind to consider how developed present-day magical apparatuses were. Why were the ancient ways of sorcery discarded? And how did all of this technology advance? While she thought on it, hey, what's that? I don't know. How did it get in here? Al heard a minor commotion from the seats behind her. Upon turning around, she saw. What? A dog? Al nearly dropped her popcorn. A large hound with pitch-black fur walking among the stands. It carried itself with the gait of a king, as though expecting all others to vacate its path. Al frowned suspiciously. Why is there a dog here? Fluffy are you? Tessera got up and waved to the beast. Fluffy? Al repeated, confused. The dog noticed Tessera and approached. It obediently took a spot next to the girl. Did you come to watch like we did, Fluffy are you? She asked. Woof, the great hound barked. You know this dog? Al questioned. Tessera nodded while rubbing under Fluffy Mayu's chin. Yes, he comes to the orphanage sometimes to play. I see. Al gazed at Fluffy Mayu. She liked animals, as all elves did, yet an instinct told her to remain on guard round this black dog. He reminded her too much of another, the Black Wolf Emperor, who was the undead king's trusted companion. Blacker's Shadow Prince struck terror in the kingdom's army with his jaws of death. Of course, this couldn't possibly be him, but that dark fur, creeping night-given form, and those golden eyes. Al couldn't help but think of that fearsome demon. Does he bite? Al asked cautiously. Don't be afraid. Fluffy Mayu is a good boy, Tessera replied, still scratching the animal's chin. It closed its eyes in satisfaction. Right. Blindly fearing this hound wouldn't do. Al calmed herself and returned her attention to the large screen. No sooner had she done so than a familiar face appeared. It's big sis Rizelia. Tessera leaned forward and pointed. The screen showed portrait shots of each member of the 18th platoon, the characteristics of their respective holy swords, and graphs detailing statistics calculated from practice matches. Now then, a commentator's voice boomed. This is a group that's drawn a lot of attention. It's Excalibur Academy's Special Entry Squad. Rizelia Crystalia, the leader of the 18th platoon and my eternal rival, is on the screen right now. Why? I recall our first meeting. It was some 10 years ago, when I was pursuing a giant lizard that escaped one of Duke Crystalia's parties. Miss Fenris, please keep your commentary impartial. What are you saying, President? I haven't even begun my MMMG. My apologies for this shameful broadcast, good listeners. After a bit of static, the commentary ended. The stadium's spectators were all riled up by the introduction of Excalibur Academy's representatives. Look, that boy is so cute. How old is he? He's only 10. If we just let him sit for a few more years, he might be ripe for the picking. Cute boys like that grow up to be Dark Lords in the bedroom. Al overheard some nearby girls wearing Excalibur Academy uniforms discussing a boy who'd come on screen. It seemed he was rather popular among Leo. Al glanced at Tessera, who gazed at the screen with rosy cheeks. Oh my, she's a precocious one, isn't she? Al chuckled. A girl in love. Al envied Tessera a little. Having been raised as a hero since infancy, she had never been allowed to experience romance. Al's thoughts drifted to her past. 1,000 years ago, the visage of her fellow apprentice, who had studied under the same master as her, came to mind. She'd always admired him for working so hard to save the world. Perhaps he was my first love, yet the hero she'd once admired had gone on to become a Dark Lord who threatened humanity. What am I thinking? I can't believe myself. The elf girl shook her head vigorously and focused her attention on the screen. The Imperial Standard Time was 10:40. Sitting beneath the glow of the underground silo's mana lamps, Rizelia and her platoon awaited the signal for the match to start. Rizelia and Elfine were huddled around their terminals, discussing strategy. Regina was leaning on a wall doing stretches, while Sakuya munched on a famous Sagara orchid food called a sushi roll. Shari, disguised as Leonis, snuck longing glances at Sakuya's snack. Starting underground is kind of an advantage. The other teams are gonna have a harder time finding us, Regina said. Rizelia shook her head calmly. Not necessarily. If we had a locational advantage, you'd be right, but an assault garden's underground passages are long and winding. Fighting down here will demand different tactics than if we were above ground. They'd have to analyze countless underground routes to guess at what opposing squads might do, compared to the surface, where large fights would break out almost as soon as the match began. This station would require the 18th platoon to deploy members more cautiously. Also, anywhere below the 4th underground level is considered off-limits, Elfine cautioned while showing everyone the map on her terminal. The linear rail tracks are down there, and they don't want us to damage them. The Holy Sword Dance Festival allowed participants to bring their terminals, but their communication features were limited outside specific areas. This was meant to mimic the kind of EMP, excessive mana pulse, jamming they might encounter in real combat against the Voids. Regina tapped her chin with a finger. I wonder which other groups are nearby. I think we can rule out the other Excalibur Academy representatives, Rizelia replied. And Princess Chatters's unit is likely on the surface, so we won't run into them soon. Highly rated units were set on the surface so they would clash early on and get the audience excited. From the higher-ups' perspective, it was foolish to put the winning team, Chatters's in particular, underground. The princess was too popular and charismatic. I mentioned it during this morning's meeting, but, Elfine said in a hushed-up voice, wary of the surveillance drones, we should probably be careful of the 4th Assault Garden's Academia unit. The Academia was an institute primarily for Holy Sword researchers, and its teams rarely scored highly at the Holy Sword Dance Festival. Its top-ranked students were very capable, but they didn't draw the same attention as the large-scale Excalibur Academy or the elite students of Halcyon Academy. However, Count Dian Fraud Fillet governed the 4th Assault Garden, and Finzel Fillet was an Academia alumnus. Its possible research for the Demon Sword project was conducted at the Academia. I doubt they'll try to do something during an event as major as the Holy Sword Dance Festival, but we should keep that in mind. There was a minute left until the match began. Rizelia got to her feet, her expression serious. Shari, naturally still disguised as Leonis, took her sleeve. Miss Celia, what's wrong, Leo? Do you want a sweet? No, Shari replied, exasperated. I've already told you this, but remember that I will only be able to offer minimal support. Rizelia nodded. That's fine. I'll show you how much stronger I am from all that training. I see. Shari averted her gaze. If nothing else, I will admit you have guts. You worked very hard. Thanks. Rizelia smiled sheepishly. At 11 o'clock Imperial Standard Time, the horns signaling the start of the Holy Sword Dance Festival echoed over the 8th Assault Garden. Holy Sword, activate. The members of the 18th platoon all spoke the words as one, manifesting their holy swords. Regina's Drag Striker, Sakuya's Reikiramayu, Elfine's Eye of the Witch, and Rizelia's Bloody Sword. Leonis likewise conjured the replica of the Staff of Sealed Sins, which was registered as his holy sword. What made this event different from the usual inter-school bouts was the ability to disqualify an opponent by destroying their holy sword. Once a holy sword was broken, it was forbidden for its wielder to call it back. Additionally, all competitors had to have their holy swords manifested constantly. Rizelia glanced at Regina, Elfine, and Leonis as she spoke. As previously discussed, we'll head out to claim core flags. Once the three of them nodded, Rizelia's eyes went to Sakuya. We're counting on you. Yes, understood. I'll do my best to keep moving. Sakuya brandished Reikiramayu lightly. Sakuya's role was to go up to the surface alone and scout enemy teams. If possible, she would use hit-and-run tactics to keep opponents distracted. Essentially, she was a hyper-offensive decoy. Having the strongest member of the 18th platoon operating solo would hopefully disrupt the opposing squads. This kind of tactic was only possible thanks to Sakuya's overwhelming skills and Reikira Mayu's powers over acceleration. "Don't blame me if I sweep the whole match, though," Sakuya boasted. "Be careful not to get too involved in any fights. Your main role is to scout and cause disarray," Rizelia reminded her with a strained smile. "All right, let's go." Rizelia raised her voice dignifiedly, the bloody sword in her hand. At the same time, Elysian Academy's first platoon members, led by Chatter's Ray Oldries, activated their holy swords. They stood at the heart of the central garden. As expected, everyone's eyes are on the princess. A young man shouldering a hunting gun-type holy sword remarked flippantly, "I'm sure they're getting lots of flattering pictures of you, silver-blooded sword princess." 3 drones buzzed around the area. "We don't have time for chatter, Colt." Chatters glared at the young man coldly, and he went silent immediately. As frivolous as Colt appeared, he was a first-rate sniper. Unsurprisingly, each member of Chatters's squad was a skilled elite, fully devoted and obedient to the princess. They were disciplined and moved with precision according to her orders. That Chatters could skillfully unite and command a group of idiosyncratic talents was due to more than her royal status. It was because all her teammates recognized her overwhelming prowess. The members of Chatters's platoon were her faithful pawns on the battlefield. A commander couldn't have asked for better fighters. However, that meant the blame for a loss all fell upon Chatters. She had long since accepted that intense pressure, though. The 3 royal houses were meant to serve as a banner for humanity to unite under in the war against the Voids. If Chatters couldn't handle this challenge, then she had no place among royalty. "Ah, I've detected something. Some bugs hiding in a large building in Area 4, a girl reported in a carefree tone. She was holding a terminal and used a scanner-type holy sword. "Which unit are they from?" "The Saint Illumina's Monastery's 4th Choir. Their holy sword's abilities are..." "It's fine. I know all their abilities," Chatters cut in, shaking her head. "Running into us right away is pretty bad luck for them," a tall man with a stern expression remarked. He was from a family line that served House Oldries. "Should I use my holy sword to level the enemy base, Your Highness?" "No. I'll do it." The audience needs a demonstration. To Chatters, winning the Holy Sword Dance Festival was a matter of duty, and victory alone wasn't enough. She needed to show off her incredible power and crush all opponents directly. Doing so would boost the royal family's authority and better secure its status as the guardian and hope of the entire human race. Chatters drew her holy sword in a fluid motion, letting the silver broadsword reflect the sunlight. "Holy sword, Ragnar Nova." She held the weapon up and then swung it down at once. A flash of light ran across the sky for a moment. Boom! Far in the distance, a building was severed in half, its top section collapsing and crashing to the ground. "Princess, they might scold us if you go too hard," Colt whispered, looking exasperated. "I made sure it wasn't a direct blow. No one participating would be foolish enough to get caught and die in an attack like that." Chatters lowered her shining sword. "No, I mean we'll lose points for destroying buildings. It doesn't matter. A single core flag will negate that." The princess had destroyed the building to demonstrate her might to the audience. The Holy Sword Dance Festival's organizers wanted Chatters to put on a spectacle. Now, the hunt is on, and our target. Chatters looked up at the clear sky. "Is the leader of Excalibur Academy's 18th platoon, Rizelia Crystalia." Chapter 9. Void Shift. Multiple sets of footfalls echoed through the abandoned underground tunnel. Rizelia and her group moved as a straight line, racing through the labyrinthine channels. 2 of the witch orbs floated ahead of them. Lighting the way, the spheres guided the group along, probed for enemies, and scanned for traps all at once. This had initially been a simple, straightforward tunnel for transporting supplies, but with partitions closing different parts of the place, it became part of a maze. "Everyone, stop," Elfine warned. "There's a core flag reaction in 100 melt radius of us." Core flags transmitted a faint mana pattern, allowing scanner-type holy swords to detect them and probe after their general direction. It's not moving, so I don't think any unit has claimed it yet. Seems like it's fairly close, but because of the winding tunnels and closing barriers, it might take a while to get there. Do you know which level it's on, Miss Fine? It's above us. Probably the second one. Ryselia's group was currently on the fourth underground tier. A partition had already sealed off the nearest staircase, so they had to wander and find another way up. It's possible another group might beat us to the punch. Ryselia hummed with concern as she examined the map displayed on her terminal. Unfortunately, it didn't denote which partitions had closed. There's an elevator ahead. Regina pointed at a metallic door ahead of them. It looked like the industrial sort meant for transporting supplies. Is it usable? The mana lights in this passage are on, so unless the higher-ups turned it off, it should be. Elfine replied. She approached the control panel with an eye of the witch orb in tow. Smirking, she added, or I could just take control of it. I'd expect nothing less from you, Miss Fine, Ryselia said, a strained smile on her lips. Huh? Elfine's fingers froze, hovering before the panel. What's wrong? This elevator. It's moving, descending, I think, ? Ryselia raised her holy sword, stepped back, and waited on guard. A few seconds later, the door opened with a whir. Huh? Inside was a large, metallic hermit crab. Is that a void simulator? These multi-legged armored weapons were employed in training exercises. This one's large eye glowed red as it lunged forward for Ryselia. Screech. Ryselia reflexively blocked it with her holy sword's blade, but she was unable to curb the momentum, which sent her flying back. What? The members of the 18th platoon had heard that several dozen new Void Simulator models would be deployed as obstacles at the Holy Sword Dance Festival. I didn't think it'd use an elevator to launch a preemptive attack on us. Leave Lady Celia alone. Regina fired her drag striker. Unfortunately, the bullets bounced off the Void Simulator's metallic body, producing sparks. The drag striker lacked the firepower to penetrate its reinforced metal-helcom plating. This training machine was meant for academy students, but it could be loaded with large artillery to provide covering fire for holy swordsmen during actual Void attacks. It was a powerful weapon in its own right. The Void Simulator swung down one of its large front legs. Ryselia kicked off the ground, evading it, and the leg sank into the ground with a thud, blowing a large hole into the concrete. Miss Fine, can you try hacking the Void Simulator's artificial elemental? Ryselia asked. Yes, I'll try. Whoops, can't let you do that. A voice suddenly called out. Ryselia looked up in alarm. A boy with a small build was clinging to a duct in the ceiling. He threw something resembling a net down at Ryselia and the others. Elfine got tangled, which rendered her immobile. Miss Fine? Ryselia called out. Hey, that's my holy sword. The Predator's web. It's a living net, so you can forget escaping. Ryselia glared at the boy. That uniform. You're from the Military Instruction School. The Military Instruction School was the second Assault Garden's Holy Swordsman training facility. It was the successor to the Knight Academy of the Old Empire and had been established before Excalibur Academy. Lucky me. I get to chew up a platoon of dropouts as soon as the match begins. The boy smirked. Looks like he set up this trap, Ryselia whispered. That's right, a mechanical voice replied mockingly from within the Void Simulator. There must be another with a holy sword that can manipulate magical apparatuses and control them from afar, Elfine said, still tangled in the net. A platoon of dropouts. Don't underestimate us. Regina fired her drag striker. Whoa there. The boy nimbly took cover behind the duct. My holy sword is strong enough to pin down voids. Once you're caught, there's no escape. The boy cast another predator's web in Regina's direction. Regina! Ryselia cried. Regina fired, but the shots from her drag striker were caught in the net. She was snared. As was Leonie's, who had been standing by the maid. Oh, shoot, I got caught, Leonie's remarked in a very monotone voice as he thrashed in the bindings. Huh? Leo? Ryselia exclaimed despite herself. Shari had definitely gotten caught on purpose. NGH. She did say she wouldn't help, but Leonie's had kept hidden so far, so as not to draw attention, and the enemy holy swordsman seemed not to notice him. It seemed likely that his body double was someone who was skilled at stealth. I get the feeling the real Leo would have helped a bit more, Rizelia thought as she leapt away. She crouched to evade the void simulator's attack, then jumped to Elfine's side. The eye of the witch could mode shift into an offensive form, the Vorpal Ray, and launch powerful attacks over a large area. However, Elfine was too tangled to concentrate enough for that. If I cut the web, ha, you're next. Crystalia the dropout. Another net spread wide as it flew toward Rizelia from above, but she brandished her holy sword. Wish, wish, wish. The bloody sword unleashed multiple blades of blood, which cut the net to bits in the blink of an eye. What? The boy exclaimed in disbelief. That won't work on me. Rizelia hurried to help Elfine, with the dancing crimson razors following after. Whoa there. I can't let you do that. A loud voice echoed through the underground passage. Something flew at Rizelia from the dark. Rizelia reflexively hopped to the side, and an object sped past her cheek. Boom! A concrete wall behind the young woman shattered. Another one? Rizelia peered into the darkness with her vampire's eyes. She spied the silhouette of a large-built man approaching her calmly. Oh ho! You actually dodged it. Not bad for a unit of dropouts. The figure stepped into view. A giant of a man carrying a chain, the serpent wielder, Kaiser Bufalop. Rizelia muttered. Kaiser Bufalop was the ace attacker of the military instruction school. His holy sword, the Crush Vice, could move independently and smash voids with its bite. The void simulator and the nets were meant to stall and inhibit. Kaiser was the one who'd finish the job. Let me have some fun before I beat Chatters, okay? Kaiser raised his burly arms. His chain holy sword swung through the air and then returned to his hand. Great metallic jaws dangled at the end of the links, lined with jagged teeth. Kaiser swung his holy sword overhead and hurled the jaws forward. Rizelia dodged adroitly, but, the chain altered its trajectory in midair. It came snapping at Rizelia from behind with movements that defied physics. A partially autonomous holy sword that attacks its target regardless of its wielder's input. Rizelia twisted to guard with the blood sword, yet the chain coiled around the weapon to yank it away. Rizelia refused to release the blood sword, though. Dance, my blade. Bloody slash. Her holy sword shone, sending crimson blades at the chain, hammering it until it came free. Rizelia got to her feet swiftly and fixed her stance. Ha ha ha, not bad, Crystalia girl. Kaiser pulled the Crush Vice back. Its snake-like jaws rose to rush at Rizelia again. The bloody razors dancing around the girl converged in one place to form a shield, but the Crush Vice burst through effortlessly. Rizelia had no choice but to fall back. Giving up that much space would put her at a disadvantage, but without any chance to move in closer, she had to play defensively. Ha ha ha, what's wrong, girl? Bang, 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 bang. The chain changed its trajectory irregularly, digging into the underground passage's walls. Quit all that running. I'll lose points if I trash this place too hard. Bang, bang, thud. Kaiser's wild swinging wound up sweeping the void simulator. If this continues, he'll corner me before long. Rizelia steeled her nerves, gathered mana in her legs, and kicked off a nearby wall. What? She sprinted across the wall, launching a surprise attack at Kaiser Bufalop. Whoops. Can't let that fly. The boy hiding in the duct launched a net at Rizelia. Blood blades tore through the thing easily, but part of it still caught the young woman's legs, disrupting her flow of mana and knocking her off balance. Although she managed to keep from collapsing to the ground. Take this. Kaiser seized upon the momentary faltering, flinging the Crush Vice at Rizelia. She managed to block it with her holy sword but couldn't offset the force of the collision, which sent her sailing backward. Celia. Lady Celia, Regina and Delphine both cried out for their friend. Rizelia's body struck the floor hard. The impact sent a terrible shudder through her bones, which left them feeling out of place. Ignoring the pain as best she could, Rizelia pushed off a knee and stood, the bloody sword in hand. Why? I'm using mana. Why does my body feel so heavy? Suddenly, She realized the answer. Rizelia spun around, locking eyes with Leonis, who was still entangled in a net. Leo. She called out to him. The boy answered only with a questioning look. Can I take them off now? Leonis's expression betrayed his confusion. His eyes widened in realization after a moment, and he nodded while giving a thumbs up. Huh? What are you talking about? Kaiser asked, still brandishing the crush vice. I had them on even when I went to sleep, so I completely forgot about them. Rizelia focused mana in her limbs and then released it in a single burst. The darkness around her arms and legs came apart and fell into her shadow. Huh? What did you just? Wow, Rizelia whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief as she hopped in place several times. I can't believe this. I feel so light. I don't know what you're mumbling about, but this is over. Kaiser snapped the crush vice at her, hoping to deliver the final blow. Before his attack connected, however, Rizelia disappeared. What? The only sound was a gentle breeze. Behind you? A flash of silver hair fluttered behind Kaiser. I'll beat you with the back of my blade, Rizelia said. Ga. The stroke of a sword knocked the military instruction school's ace out, and the crush vice vanished. A moment later, something dropped from the duct overhead, hitting the ground with a thud. The net-casting holy swordsman lay on the ground, his eyes devoid of expression. They did it. Excalibur Academy's 18th platoon beat the military instruction school's veteran ace, Kaiser Bufalop. With this, they've scored 1 point. The commentator's enthusiastic report caused the stadium to erupt into cheers. Celia is amazing. Tessera stared at the screen with rapt attention, her eyes absolutely glittering with excitement. That really was an impressive display, Al conceded. Rizelia's sword skills were yet underdeveloped by Al's and Sakia's standards. However, her physical prowess when besting the enemy ace was impressive. She'd improved by leaps and bounds compared to when they'd fought together in the 6th Assault Garden, Alexandria. Hey, and the one to defeat Kaiser was none other than Rizelia Crystalia. Such a performance befits my worthy rival. Miss Fenris, please stop hijacking the commentary. What are you doing? I am not at all done yet. You did it, Lady Celia. Regina gave her friend a high five upon being freed from the net. 2 of the military instruction school's competitors had lost their holy swords and slunk back into a dark corridor, muttering bitterly all the while. Defeated competitors were to either retreat to a non-combatant zone or stay put until the administrative bureau picked them up. Incidentally, the holy swordsman controlling the void simulator had fled. But wow, Lady Celia, you moved so quickly out of nowhere, Regina noted, puzzled. A question mark all but popped up over her head. I guess I was just tense because this is my first time participating in the Holy Sword Dance Festival. Rizelia waved her hand in front of her face evasively. She turned to Shari, still in Leonis's form. I was basically walking around all day with the shadow shackles. I completely forgot about them. Shari gave a dry cough. Normally, I'd expect you to beat opponents of that level with the fetters still on. Truthfully, she hadn't expected Rizelia to forget about the shadowy weights. Let's go claim that core flag, then. Regina approached the elevator. Wait, before we do, we need to inform Sakia that we eliminated a few from the military instruction school's unit. Elfine connected an Eye of the Witch orb to her terminal and tried transmitting. That's strange. She cocked her head. What is it? I can't get in touch with Sakia. The Imperial Standard Time was 11:40. That princess really let loose on us. And here I thought we might be able to enjoy this match a little. A girl dressed in a uniform from St. Illumina's monastery chuckled from beneath the rubble of a collapsed building in the central garden. Immediately after the match had started, Chatter's Ray Oldriz's holy sword destroyed the building the girl and her comrades were using for cover. The attack that followed ended with the 4th Choir's utter defeat. It took only 10 minutes. But that princess. Were her holy sword to become a demon sword, she'd make for a fine sacrifice. The girl's red lips warped unnaturally. However, preparing the demon swords was another group's responsibility. Her tasks were to ensure humanity's capital overlapped with part of the Void's world and to bring the great goddess's voice to all. Iris Void Priestess was an apostle of the goddess and speaker for the Voids. She was a powerful undead and a high-ranking officer in the Undead King's forces. Now then, let us begin the Void shift. The Dark Priestess took out a triangular stone, a trapezohedron, a fragment of the goddess's soul. The black rock that drew in the surrounding light floated in the air. It was set almost directly in the middle of the central garden, right above the two mana furnaces that were the heart of the 8th Assault Garden. Mana furnaces. Most people didn't know the secret behind those endless energy sources, that they drew power from the remnants of fallen gods. Of the two in the 8th Assault Garden, one housed the remains of an ordinary demigod, while the other held a deity from another world. Which meant that Mana Furnace possessed a pseudo-ability to traverse dimensions. Considering it's merely a copy of the Azure Hold, it's quite inferior to the genuine article. But even an imitation of the magical apparatus bequeathed by the goddess is far too great a gift for mere humans. The trapezohedron floating in midair shone dark, resonating. It was beginning to synchronize with the second mana furnace. Now, let the ritual begin. Tear away the veil of this false world to reveal true reality. Let this city, the final citadel of humanity, be the beginning of it all. Crack. Fissures ran through the air around the trapezohedron. Hee. The voids were like mere stains that dripped into this world. Those blots alone were enough to drive humanity to near extinction. But that was only the beginning. A total breach would soon follow. Even the greatest dam needed only the smallest crack to begin its eventual rupture. A group of shadows rose eerily behind Iris. They were the members of the Saint Illumina's monastery's 4th choir, who had been defeated by Chatters's attack earlier. They looked up at the trapezohedron floating in the sky, their eyes hollow and blank. Now, let us stoke the furnace fires with our sacrifice to bring the void world here. The Imperial Standard Time was 11:45. 5 figures clad in Excalibur Academy uniforms lay on the ground in Industrial Block 3 amid the wreckage. These were the Holy Swordsmen of Excalibur Academy's 5th platoon. Unlike the Special Entry Unit, the 18th Platoon, this squad was made of upperclassmen elites who'd handled many Void Hive extermination missions. Why are we? Their leader, still conscious, groaned. They had lost to the 4th Assault Garden's Academia Unit, yet based on the 5th Platoon's preliminary research, they should have outmatched the Academia's contestants. The Academia students looked down upon the defeated Holy Swordsmen with eyes bereft of joy for their victory and pity for their opponents. Their expressions lacked all emotion save reverence for the emptiness. Let us stoke the furnace with our sacrifice to bring the goddess of nothingness. Now let the gates to emptiness open. They all recited as one, as if they were chanting solemn scripture. What? What are you? What are you doing? Their consciousnesses were linked by a device implanted in their brains. Seraphim, the Fillet Company's artificial elemental, was responsible for that. The creatures delivered the word of the goddess from the void world and awakened the power of the demon swords in people. This system, developed by Finzel Fillet, had been tested on the Sigura Orchid's Kenki gathering. With holy swords as sacrifices, let emptiness incarnate manifest here. The Academia Unit's members raised their holy swords together. No, not holy swords. Theirs had already warped into demon swords, losing their original characteristics to become blades shaped like tentacles. The Void Shift project was an effort meant to transport Camelot into the Void world, and it was this squad from the Academia's role to supply the demon swords necessary. Since the power of both demon and holy swords stemmed from the same source, they were excellent bait for gigantic voids. This made the Holy Sword Dance Festival, a gathering of powerful holy swordsmen, the perfect hunting ground for collecting sacrifices. Stop. Somebody, help. Me. The 5th platoon leader's scream echoed in vain. Knights of the Empire were stationed around the 8th Assault Garden to supervise the event, but they didn't seem to respond to this unusual occurrence. The footage drones buzzing overhead had been hijacked by Seraphim, projecting fake footage to spectators. The tentacle-like holy swords came down upon the leader of the 5th platoon. "Hey there. Looks like you're having fun. Mind if I join? Question mark. The demon swordsmen all turned around in unison at this voice. At some point, a blue-haired girl had arrived entirely undetected. She wore Sakura Orchid traditional garb over her Excalibur Academy uniform. "I came because I felt the presence of other demon swords like mine." Sakuya Seaglin stepped forward, her katana enveloped in lightning. "A squad from the 4th Assault Gardens Academia, huh? I suppose Miss Elfine was right to warn us." "Who are you?" "An Excalibur Academy swordswoman, all on her own?" The demon swordsman surrounded Sakuya cautiously. The girl stopped in her tracks, turned Reikira Mayu's blade, and "Prepare yourselves." Demon swordsman tore away her eye patch, revealing an eye that shone amber. It was the mystic eye of time, given to her by a Dark Lord. "For I am one who hunts demon swords." Chapter 10. The Silver-Blooded Sword Princess. "It's no use. I can't get in touch with her at all." Elfine shook her head, touching the earring-type communication terminal. "Maybe she's fighting another unit?" "Yes, that's what her terminal readout suggests. As best I can tell, she hasn't been eliminated. It's secure." "She'll be fine," Regina assured her. Rizelia nodded. "All right. Sakuya can handle herself." Although she was worried about her friend, Rizelia trusted Sakuya. After eliminating the 2 military instruction school holy swordsmen, the 18th platoon took the elevator to the 2nd underground level. "There it is." "A core flag," Elfine said. The eye of the witch orb floating in front of her as she led the others down the passage cast its light on a toolbox set on the wall. Rizelia entered their unit code into the toolbox, and it opened, revealing a jewel-shaped object. This was a typical core flag, normally used in practice matches between students, and that's our first one. "We did it." Rizelia poked it with her finger, and after it read her fingerprint and mana pattern, a point was added to the 18th platoon's terminals. "This is where the tough part begins. We have to protect this core flag." She tucked the jewel into a pocket of her uniform. If another group stole the core flag, the 18th platoon would lose half of their accumulated score. In addition to the point from the flag, their terminals also recorded the points they'd received for defeating 2 military instruction school members. Beating Kaiser, the unit's ace, earned more than the other opponent. "Okay, let's take the elevator to the surface," Rizelia decided. "Yes, I'm worried about Sakuya, too," Elfine replied. "It would be harder for other units to discover them if they remained underground, but they'd be overtaken in the race to gain all the core flags. Besides, the Holy Sword Dance Festival was more than just a sports tournament. It was a celebration of the Holy Swordsmen, where each school's representatives competed for their institute's pride. They didn't want to tarnish Excalibur Academy's dignity before countless viewers." When the 18th platoon tried to return to the elevator, Leonis, who had been mostly silent today, whispered, "Something's coming?" Clang, clang. The sounds of shrill, metallic footsteps approached rapidly. Red lights illuminated the dark hall. "Void simulators?" Rizelia exclaimed, shocked. "Is it the guy from earlier again?" "You should learn when to give up." Regina fired her drag striker, accurately shooting through one machine's segmented leg joint. The Metahalcom crab-like robot collapsed on the spot, sparks issuing from its internal mechanisms. However, the construct was an anti-void weapon. Losing a single leg wasn't enough to stop it. It rose again and charged unsteadily. "TCH, the elevator's no good. Let's intercept them in the open space out back," Rizelia instructed. "Regina and I will guard the back. Miss Fine, Leo, you two go ahead." "Understood." "Leo, come with me." Elfine pulled Leonis by the arm and ran off. The void simulators weren't much of a threat, but there were too many of them. Anyone who could control so many simultaneously had a top-rate holy sword. The 18th platoon fell back toward an open chamber. "Let's clear them out here." Rizelia raised the bloody sword. Typically, funneling enemies into a narrow passage was the superior strategy, but this area would make using large-scale destructive techniques more feasible. A loud thud issued from behind Rizelia, Huh? Rizelia and Regina turned around in time to see a partition at the end of the hall close. Miss Fine? No sooner had Rizelia called out "BRR, BRR, BRR" then the ground began to ascend with a loud noise. Lady Celia. This whole place is an elevator for loading supplies, Regina said, tapping on a nearby control panel with no success. Rizelia bit her lip. The military instruction school's holy swordsman had chased them here using the void simulators, then sealed off Elfine using the partition. Take that, take that. That's for my friends. The void simulators spoke with mechanical voices. WHY, you. Rizelia launched a blade of blood that destroyed a void simulator's legs. Celia, are you all right? Elfine's garbled voice came through Rizelia's earring device. Yes, we're fine. How are things on your side? A wall blocked the way, but I opened it with the eye of the witch. I guess this was a trap. Or maybe it's better to call it a revenge prank. The elevator carrying Rizelia and Regina continued its steady ascent. Miss Fine, at this rate, we'll end up on the surface, Regina explained. Understood. Leo and I will head topside, too. Let's regroup at point F. Roger. Sakuya sprinted across the ground, blue lightning crackling under her feet. This was Thunderclap, the peak of her holy sword's acceleration power. Each time her sword cut through the air, sparking with pale lightning, a demon swordsman fell to the ground. Her amber-colored left eye shone, allowing her to perceive potential outcomes several seconds before they occurred. Sakuya could even see 7 possibilities at once, using that information to evade fatal outcomes, selecting futures where she defeated her opponents. Merely possessing the Mystic Eye's power wasn't enough to accomplish this. Instantly knowing which possible result to choose and responding accordingly was a feat beyond a normal sword fighter. The Academia Squad's demon swords let out nondescript howls. Their blades, shaped like disgusting tentacles, twisted like whips to lash at Sakuya. The weapons snapped at her like hungry beasts. Too slow. Slow enough for a flight to land on you. Switching to a one-handed grip, Sakuya pushed herself to move even faster. Cutting down the writhing demon swords one by one, she bolted at the demon swordsman directly. The world appeared to stand still around her. Sakuya's perception of time was accelerating. Is this part of the Mystic Eye's power? The Mystic Eye of Time was the perfect companion to Sakuya's holy sword. Had the Dark Lord Solvades known of Sakuya's Reiki Ramayu and its abilities? Several future possibilities converged into one, sealing fate into certainty. Mikagami-style swordsmanship, Levin / Sakuya mercilessly cut down a demon swordsman! Burning pain shot through her eyeball. 40 seconds, any more than that and it'll be too much for me. Sakuya jumped back, cutting down the tentacle-like demon swords swiping at her from all directions. The amber glow left her eye, which returned to its natural blue color. Perhaps noticing this change, the remaining 3 demon swordsmen charged her. The tentacled demon swords fused directly with their owner's arms, moving independently. I see. You've completely discarded your humanity, Sakuya whispered sorrowfully. She gripped Reiki Ramayu tightly with both hands. Mikagami-style swordsmanship, thundering lightning slash. A tremendous crash accompanied the stroke that cleaved through a tentacle and arm. That's the third. Sakuya transitioned seamlessly into her next attack, felling another demon sword behind her, and moving quickly to her next target. As she fought, Sakuya felt an unusual presence and looked up. What? Her legs froze up in shock. A fissure ran through the sky above the 8th Assault Garden. Cracks formed in reality heralded the arrival of voids, but this fissure was undeniably different. The air opened wide, like an eye, revealing a world of red. This irregular tear seemed to peer down at Sakuya without blinking. No, is that? The very same rip in space had appeared over the Sigura Orchid 9 years ago! The now monstrous demon swordsmen howled together. Tentacles shot through the walls of nearby buildings. The monstrous people were evidently content to ignore Sakuya. Leaping from wall to wall toward the central garden, directly beneath the tier. Wait! Sakuya immediately activated Thunderclap to pursue. Crack, Crack, crack. Unfortunately, multiple fissures formed around her, and repulsive creatures tore through voids. The large elevator carrying Rizelia and Regina slowed to a stop as it reached the surface. Sunlight washed over the pair, forcing Rizelia to squint. This looks like a storage sector. Regina examined the area cautiously with the drag striker in hand. Box-shaped structures dotted their surroundings. We need to regroup with Elfine and Leo. Our rendezvous spot is, huh? Regina stared at her terminal in disbelief, then swallowed hard. What's wrong, Regina? Rizelia asked. 3 core flags are moving to this point. What? That meant a unit that had already collected core flags was on the move. To have gathered 3 so soon after the event began meant it was a powerful squad. Lady Celia, you don't think? Yeah, I've got a bad feeling about this. The final boss has already arrived. Rizelia and Regina exchanged looks, beads of cold sweat on their foreheads. This was bad. If their terminals detected the approaching core flags, that meant the enemy unit had surely noticed the one Rizelia was carrying. They're definitely coming this way. Let's run for now. Right. There was no telling how many people were approaching, but Rizelia and Regina doubted they'd be able to handle it on their own. They had to flee beyond the opposing squad's detection range. But whoosh! A rippling sound raced over their heads. A giant warehouse had been slashed through diagonally. What? Crash! The top half of the structure slid over, collapsing to the ground with a great tremor. A cloud of dust rose into the air. The edifice that had stood between the 2 girls and the approaching threat was gone. Lady Celia. That holy sword. It's definitely. I know. Rizelia spun around, coughing from the dust. She spied a figure approaching from beyond the cloud. A girl in military attire approached slowly, carrying a broadsword-type holy sword. The 3rd princess of the human integrated empire, Chatters Ray Eltries. Her dignified jade eyes beheld Rizelia and Regina coldly. So this is where you've been hiding, Rizelia Crystalia. You've saved me the trouble of heading underground. Lady Chatters, have I done something to offend you? Rizelia asked nervously. Chatters shook her head. No, I bear no ill will toward you. This is a personal issue. Foolish reporters have been hounding me for days, asking my thoughts on Rizelia Crystalia and whether I see you as a rival. They even got in the way of my precious time with Altaria. It was truly irritating. So you venting your anger on me? Yes. Allow me to apologize before we begin. I really want to blow off some steam. Chatters stopped in her tracks and raised her holy sword slowly. I will now proceed to overpower you. No one will obnoxiously compare us ever again. Sorry about my big sister, Lady Celia, Regina whispered. I doubt she'll let us escape. Rizelia steeled herself and readied the bloody sword. Regina, keep an eye out for any enemy snipers. You got it. There's no need, Chatters stated. My subordinates are not here. You came alone, Lady Chatters? Of course. What would be the point of beating you if I had help? The members of the 1st platoon are keeping watch nearby, so neither they nor anyone else interferes. It didn't sound like a lie, and Chatters Ray Eltries wasn't the kind who resorted to deception. She'd carried 3 core flags to bait Rizelia out of hiding. Still, this might be a good opportunity. Rizelia glared straight at Chatters. Defeating the strongest, most famous holy swordswoman would mean all those core flags, pushing the 18th platoon that much closer to victory. Regina, cover me. You've got it, Lady Celia. Regina replied cheerfully from behind. Princess Chatters, this might be 2-on-1, but I hope you won't think us cowards. The Holy Sword Dance Festival is a team competition, and we're desperate to win. Of course, go right ahead. Given the difference in our abilities, this is a suitable handicap for me, Chatters replied seriously before lunging forward. Chatters closed the distance in a single bound. If Rizelia tried to block, her bloody sword would undoubtedly shatter. Knowing this, Rizelia tilted her blade to intercept the strike. Clang! The swords locked, spraying sparks into the air. Rizelia slid her angled weapon, warding off her opponent's brute strength. The locked blades separated. The 2 combatants had traded positions. She's so strong, even after I diffused some of the force. Ryselia's hands felt numb. Remarkable. It seems I've underestimated you somewhat, Chatters praised her. No need to hold back, Your Highness. Ryzelia corrected her grip on the bloody sword and glared at Chatters. That's a good look in your eyes. Chatters raised her holy sword overhead. I'll take this a bit more seriously, then. The broadsword's blade turned to light, extending to a height of 20 melts. Chatters's holy sword, the Ragnar Nova, possessed incredible destructive power. It was capable of slaying gigantic voids with a single blow, and its astounding range allowed it to eradicate void colonies from a distance. Chatters could adjust the radiant blade freely. These were simple abilities, but dealing with them in practice was difficult. Earlier, Chatters had used these powers to blow off the warehouse's roof from a distance. The Ragnar Nova was a top-class weapon for dealing with voids. Chatters brought her weapon down diagonally. The luminous streak bit through reinforced asphalt easily. Blocking it wasn't an option. Ryzelia jumped and sprinted up a warehouse's wall. She ran to the top and then launched a surprise attack from above. A petty trick. Chatters swung the Ragnar Nova horizontally, cutting down the warehouse. Whoa! Having lost her footing, Ryzelia nearly fumbled, but she managed to land on her feet. Your Highness, they'll deduct points if you destroy buildings. Ryzelia called out. Getting enough core flags should cancel out any penalties. That's a crazy way of looking at it. Perhaps that was a quality Chatters shared with Regina. Ryselia's feet stopped. Chatters brought the blade of light up and then abruptly turned, moving her sword as though to block something. Ting! A spark bounced off the Ragnar Nova. Regina's covering fire. Now, Lady Celia. Regina loosed more shots from far away. Chatters cut the bullets out of the air, and Ryzelia used that opening to rush in. The Ragnar Nova could change its range freely, meaning that there was no benefit to Ryzelia keeping her distance from the princess. Her best option was to force a close-quarters battle. Countless blades of blood formed a spiral that converged at the tip of the bloody sword. Bloody petal spiral. Chatters watched as a blade of blood erupted before her eyes. The spiral coiled and snaked, moving in a random, zigzag trajectory toward Chatters. Enough with the games. The Ragnar Nova swept the blood blades away entirely. Ryselia's attack wasn't over yet, however. She took another step forward, not allowing the princess to back away. Her attack had been a feint to prepare a more powerful strike. Ryzelia fought using the same sword style that Chatters did, Imperial Orthodox. But there was more to it than that. Ryzelia had studied different schools of technique for years, never knowing if her holy sword would manifest. Some of those methods were seen as abnormal, heretical even. In addition to more vicious sword maneuvers, she incorporated kicks and leg sweeps into her fighting, creating a fluid whole. Normally, Ryzelia would also employ sorcery to confuse the enemy, but that was out of the question during the Holy Sword Dance Festival. Her fighting style was a blade dance, and it was overwhelming. Chatters. Your legwork is quite strange for one of the famed Crystallia Knights. True, this is an unorthodox style, but my soul is still that of a Crystallia Knight. Ryzelia shouted, thrusting the bloody sword forward. However, Chatters dodged this full-force attack, albeit only just. Fascinating, Chatters remarked, holding up the Ragnar Nova. I'll be the judge of the quality of your soul, then. Ryzelia braced herself, weary of that luminous blade. Holy sword, mode shift, Ragnar shadow. Suddenly, Chatters's holy sword shattered. No, it didn't break, it split into multiple fragments. Chatters swung her holy sword down, and all the shards rushed Ryzelia with deadly precision. Exclamation mark. Ryzelia gathered magic in her legs and jumped away, but the razors pursued, their trajectories winding like whips. Bang, bang, bang. Sparks burst to life as shards were sent flying back, compliments of Regina's covering fire. The Ragnar shadow balances both attack and defense. I knew about it from the data, but Ryzelia gritted her teeth as she leapt away to evade. Data couldn't simulate real combat. The Ragnar Nova was optimized for eliminating voids, but its extreme firepower made it too destructive and lethal for use in the Holy Sword Dance Festival, with its many rules and restrictions. It was the same for Regina's drag howl. The Ragnar shadow was tricky, though. These luminous pieces of the blade tracked a target but also acted as a shield to protect Chatters. In that regard, the princess's holy sword was similar to Ryselia's bloody sword. Chatters brandished the hilt of her weapon like a whip. The clean strokes from before were gone. Now her strikes were constantly shifting trajectories. A flurry of small blades rained upon the battlefield, carving vehicles meant to carry supplies to scrap metal. She'll overwhelm me if I let her keep me at this range. I have to get at her flank. Ryzelia put mana into her legs again, releasing it to propel herself forward. The longer the battle continued, the more Chatters would win out. The gap in their skills was too significant. Ryzelia needed to settle this fight while she still had mana. Bloody petal spiral. Ryzelia jumped with the bloody sword gripped in both hands. Countless razors of blood converged at the sword's tip, forming a spiral drill. Come if you dare. Ryzelia Crystalia. Mode shift. Ragnarnova. The scattered blades of light coalesced in Chatters's hands again as the princess stood to meet Ryselia's do-or-die attack. If they were to clash, the Ragnarnova would overwhelm the bloody sword, shattering it. However, don't forget I'm still here, too. Mode shift. Drag howl. Regina called out. The girl's sniper rifle turned into a large anti-void cannon. What? Chatters's eyes shot wide. An intense burst rocketed from the cannon. Boom! The target wasn't Chatters herself, but the ground beneath her. The asphalt caved in immediately, sending Chatters plummeting into the underground passages below. And as the princess tumbled, Ryzelia delivered a powerful slash. So this was your plan? Regina and I don't need a plan to work together. They could each understand one another without any special signals. They were best friends and had been raised together since infancy. The bloody sword came hurtling down, blowing the Ragnarnova and Chatters away. The princess's holy sword remained intact, though. Chatters landed, braced herself, and immediately corrected her posture. I put everything into that attack. I can't believe she stopped it. I admit it. Ryzelia Crystalia. Chatters's blonde hair fluttered as she fixed her gaze upon her enemy. You are a holy swordswoman worthy of a serious battle. She lifted the Ragnarnova to eye level, and Ryzelia did the same with the bloody sword. A shrill warning siren blared. ? Both women reacted immediately. Every holy swordsman knew what that alarm meant. A large-scale void incursion. A large creature soared over the open sea. Its wings spread and its sizable shadow racing over the waves. It was Leonis's skull dragon. Is it much farther? Leonis whispered in annoyance as he stood upright atop the dragon's head, watching the horizon. The skull dragon's flight speed couldn't match a living dragon's. Such was the result of creating it for fighting, rather than mobility. The Holy Sword Dance Festival has surely commenced already. Still, it was too soon for him to give up. He could swap places with Shari halfway through the event. The Skull Dragon roared. A large city had appeared in the distance at last. There it is. Chapter 11. Return of the Undead King. Avoid attack alarm. Ryzelia and Chatters both looked up. They saw a tear form in the sky and rapidly expand. No. A crack that big, Ryzelia whispered in disbelief. I'm sorry, but it seems our match ends here. Chatters lowered her holy sword, a severe expression on her face. She looked just as taken aback as Ryzelia, but only for a moment. This is an emergency. You two are hereby under my command. We need to regroup with the units from the other schools participating in the Holy Sword Dance Festival, leave this place, and return to the capital to defend the civilians. Why yes. Understood. Ryzelia responded. The two climbed out of the pit formed by the drag howl shot and returned to the surface. You all right, princess? A voice asked from Chatters's terminal. Looks like we've got trouble. Colt, I'm joining up with the 18th platoon for now. Where are you? The pesky buggers have us surrounded. There's too many of them. Any chance you can break through? We're the fearsome princess's first platoon. So long as we have old Balthus and Mifa on our side, we'll kick these monsters' backsides no problem. Good. It's reassuring to hear that. Then you should all go assist the other units and head for the Area 3 coupling bridge. We'll regroup there. Wait, what about you? Chatters ended the call without answering. Voids were gushing out of the crack in the sky overhead. Damn voids, the princess spat. Then she turned to Rizelia and Regina. We'll make for Area 3 as we return to the capital. Contact your allies while you still can. It won't be long until communications become unstable. The mana lighting in the underground passage turned red, and a shrill siren howled in the distance. Elfine pulled Shari, who was disguised as Leonis, by the hand, as they made their way back to the surface. It looks like the situation took a turn for the worse. Voids must have attacked the capital. Can you hear me, Shari? A voice called telepathically. Yes, Lord Blackers, she replied. Those cursed monsters are threatening the kingdom. I am protecting Lord Magnus's school with the 3 champions of Rogners, so destroying the monstrosities in the capital falls to you. Understood. Shari replied, forming a copy shaped like Leonie's from her shadow. She let her fingers slip away from Elfine's grasp and disappeared, swapping places with the decoy. Let's begin. Shari returned to her maid-uniformed appearance, held up her Refiska dagger, and vanished into the dark. Chatters led the charge, with Rizelia and Regina following close after. Miss Finney. Do you read? Rizelia had tried calling a few times. Yes. I hear you. The transmission finally got through. Elfine's voice came through Rizelia's earring, though it was heavily interspersed with static. A gigantic deer in space appeared over the 8th Assault Garden. Regina and I are under Princess Chatters's command and are heading for the capital as we speak. Roger. Leo and I will dot the surface. Administrative Bureau. And then regroup. All right. Be careful out there. Yes. You too, Celia. After ending the call, Rizelia quickened her pace to run alongside Chatters. Do you have any thoughts, Rizelia Crystalia? Chatters asked, her eyes fixed on the rupture in the sky. It looks like the prelude to a stampede. I see. You two have experienced a few of those. After all, Chatters muttered. So if this is a stampede, it means a Void Lord is liable to appear. Lady Celia, look. Regina exclaimed sharply from a few paces back. Crack, crack, crack. A fresh fracture ran through the air directly ahead, and voids swiftly emerged from within. Do we take a detour? Rizelia asked Chatters. No. We power through. Follow me. The princess declared, racing forward as she held her holy sword ready. Hi-ah! The Ragnarnova grew to a length of 50 melts, and Chatters swiped it through the swarm. Whoosh! Wow! Rizelia could only gawk in amazement. If Chatters had brought that power to bear against her, she wouldn't have stood a chance. I can't make use of that repeatedly, Chatters confessed, shaking her head. The larger I make the blade, the more of my power it consumes. We need to break through quickly. Regina. Mercedes, cover me. Huh? Regina looked shocked by the order. What's wrong? Chatters questioned. It's just, you know my name? I know the names of all the Holy Sword Dance Festival participants, as one should. Right. Regina nodded hurriedly. Dance, my drenched blade, bloody petal spiral. Rizelia swung the bloody sword, cutting down the remaining voids. Fly-shaped voids dove from above, only for Regina to accurately pick them out of the air. Hi-ah! Chatters forged ahead, cleaving through every foe in her way. Together, the 3 managed to reach Area 3, and from there, they moved to the Central Garden's main street. Wait, there's a unit under attack somewhere, Chatters said sharply as she slew a void standing in her way. At the very center of a ruined plaza at the heart of the Central Garden was a deer in space that was expanding by the second. Beneath it stood a group of holy swordsmen, motionless and surrounded by voids. That garb. Are they from the Saint Illumina's monastery? Rizelia wondered. Yes, so it seems. Let's help them. Okay. Chatters raced forward, the Ragnarnova in hand. Rizelia kept the pace, deploying a barrier of blood blades. But then she paused. She sensed something amiss. She had nothing to go on but intuition. Yet anxiety gripped her heart. The Saint Illumina's monastery unit surrounded by the voids. Didn't look like they were under attack. If anything, they appeared to be commanding the monstrous things. Chatters cleaved through the voids and reached the group first. She knelt by a frightened girl wearing a cassock. Are you all right? Are any of you injured? Chatters inquired gently. We're fine. You saved us, Your Highness. The girl looked up with terror in her eyes. You came at just the right time. I just thought I needed more demon swords to add to the pyre. What? Princess Chatters! Rizelia cried. The girl's red lips twisted into a grin. Wah! Something akin to spider legs burst from the girl's back, one of which pierced Chatters. KHHK. Blood spurted from the princess's body, dyeing her Elishon Academy uniform crimson. Her body was hurled through the air, collapsing hard upon the ground. Your Highness! Rizelia shouted in alarm. A puddle of blood formed beneath Chatters. The girl with the spider legs sprouting from her back looked down on the princess, wearing an ecstatic expression. Oh my, you're so foolish, Your Highness. The facade of the girl melted away, revealing pale skin, deep red eyes, and a black dress. How kind of you to offer yourself up as a sacrifice. Rizelia lunged with the bloody sword. She had no idea what had just happened, but protecting Chatters was her primary instinct in this situation. Hey, the woman snickered, blocking the incoming blade at the last second. Very good. Brave girls are the most delectable. ? Clang. The woman arranged the spider legs extending from her back in a pattern reminiscent of a ribcage to shield herself. Just who are you? Rizelia demanded. Hey, I'm an apostle. A follower of the goddess from the other side of this tier. Apostle? Yes, the 9th apostle, Iris Void Priestess. Void? You mean this fracture? That's right, I opened the gate. Although in truth, I only gave the first push. The real fun is what comes next. Rizelia didn't understand a single word this woman was saying. Regina, take care of Princess Chatters. She called over her shoulder while pushing her sword against the spider legs. But, Lady Celia, what about you? I'll stall her here. Please hurry. Princess Chatters is a symbol of hope for all the civilians and holy swordsmen. We can't afford to lose her. Regina hesitated for a moment and then bit her lip. Understood. Please be careful. She hoisted Chatters's limp, bloodied body over her shoulder. Oh, I'm not going to let you get away, Iris said before leaping into the air. ? An intense mana glow converged in the woman's hand. 5th order spell, Vars Faga. Boom. The spell produced a powerful explosion, and a giant pillar of fire erupted around Rizelia. Don't tell me that was enough to kill you. What? Iris Void Priestess's shrill laughter was cut short. Crimson light, brighter than the flames, emerged. A dress billowed, untouched by the inferno. Go, Regina. I'll take care of her. After she'd donned the true ancestor's dress, Rizelia's mana surged furiously. You irritating flies. This land will one day be my lord's territory. Shari spat coldly as she threw a dagger. Hopping from one building's shadow to another's, she slew the insect-like voids that appeared from the cracks. Landing on a rooftop, she looked up at the giant tier overhead. Voids spilled from it ceaselessly. I don't think I'll be able to dispose of that many on my own. Shari bit her lip as she cut down more of the approaching monsters. Failure to defend my lord's domain after he entrusted me with it is inexcusable. Only death would absolve me. And then there was the matter of Leonie's minion, Rizelia Crystalia. Shari had to make sure nothing befell her. But locating the girl was difficult in this vast city. And with the voids radiating intense mana, communication terminals were of no use. Worst of all, Shari had a terrible sense of direction. Seriously, where is she and what is she doing? The assassin maid wondered aloud as she swept away a swarm of voids with shadow whips. Suddenly, the air over the 8th Assault Garden was rent in two. What? The rip widened, as if it were being turned inside out, and an ominous red sky spread across the world. From beyond the opening, a gigantic hand appeared. WHWH, what is that? Shari shuddered, her dusk-colored eyes wide with shock. An unimaginably gigantic void. Judging by the arms scale, if a creature of that size fully emerged, it would destroy the 1st, 7th, and 8th Assault Gardens completely. I can't do anything about that thing. Shari's assassin instincts told her that much, and that was only the beginning. Crack, crack, crack. The tier grew even larger. Two more gigantic limbs reached from the hole. It can't be. Shari's expression turned to one of utter despair. Each of those arms belonged to different voids. There were at least 3 of them now. Shari stared blankly, hopelessly. Shari, Blackers. Answer me. I don't care which one of you it is. My lord? Shari raised her face in surprise after hearing his voice in her mind. My lord, you've returned. She replied. Not quite yet. I can see the capital, but it'll take me a while longer to return. Shari, inform me of the situation. Things look to be in utter chaos from what I can glean. Yes. A gigantic deer in space appeared over the 8th Assault Garden, where the Holy Sword Dance Festival was being held, Shari explained while brandishing her whip to fell more voids. Swarms of the monsters called voids, and at least 3 gigantic specimens, are attempting to emerge on this side. Can you handle them? My apologies, my lord. I cannot do it on my own. I see. Leonie seemingly took a moment to consider. Shari, I give you permission to unleash the Everdark Queen. The Everdark Queen? But she. We have no choice. We are up against monsters, so our only recourse is to meet this challenge with one of our own. But, do it. Freeing her is dangerous, but I'll manage. Leonie's tone left no room for argument. Very well. I'll do it at once. Shari nodded and removed her maid's headdress. Hierarch Ryselian unleashed the true ancestor's dress's power. Her argent hair shone, and her ice blue eyes turned crimson. She surrendered herself to the overflowing mana and shot forward. Ah! The Spider-Woman's red lips quirked into a grin, and she snapped her fingers. The Saint Illumina's monastery holy swordsmen turned their blank, emotionless eyes to Ryzelia and lunged at her together. She's controlling them? Ryzelia charged into the group. Using the power of the true ancestor's dress, she converted her vast vampire queen mana reserves into brute strength. She caught a large man rushing her with a high kick to the jaw. Pivoting, Ryzelia landed a roundhouse kick to another student, knocking him to the ground. Sorry, but I can't hold back right now. Ryzelia brandished the bloody sword, producing blades of blood that cut down 2 more students. She could only hope the wounds weren't fatal as she sprinted for the Spider-Woman. Oh my, what does this mean? Iris Void Priestess cocked her head in confusion. Why do you have that dress? The woman's face lost all expression, but her pupils widened. Vicious malice washed over Ryzelia, sending chills through her body. She knows about this dress? Did she know Leonie's, then? That red-headed girl, was an old acquaintance of Leonie's. However, Ryzelia got the feeling that Vi was a friend. This Spider-Woman, Iris, felt different. She eyed the true ancestor's dress with a sticky, clinging sort of gaze. That garment belongs to a great man. Did you lowly humans ransack Necrozoa's glorious treasure vaults? Iris scowled and began mumbling to herself. No, a human couldn't handle that treasure. You couldn't possibly be undead, could you? Lord Nefakar said nothing of the sort. I don't understand what she wants, but Ryzelia moved at lightning speed, swinging the bloody sword down. Clang! The spider legs deflected her holy sword's blade, ? Oh, well, I'll just torture you for information on him. If you're undead, I should be able to hack off your limbs. You won't die so long as your head's still attached, right? Iris's arachnid legs came crashing down in succession. Ryzelia jumped away to evade them, and the sharp limbs crushed the rubble on the ground to bits. Bloom wildly, my blades, bloody petal flurry. Ryzelia ran in an arc, deploying crimson razors as she moved for Iris. Aha! Iris evaded with surprisingly graceful movements, her spider legs parrying the blood blades. Without the true ancestor's dress boosting her strength, Ryzelia wouldn't have been able to keep up. Ryzelia kicked off a building and dashed up its wall. Focusing the mana in her legs, she released it all at once, blasting herself toward Iris. She focused all her strength into a single attack, empowering her hands with magic power. The cut severed a few spider legs, sending them flying through the air. However, Iris didn't appear bothered. Were you the one who called the voids? Ryzelia demanded. No, all I did was help open the gate, Iris replied. The void monsters are just the vanguard, drawn to this side by the holy sword's power. What do you mean? Ryzelia asked, slashing up to lop off a spider leg plunging for her. Just look at that deer in the sky. The world is being overwritten. This world, protected by the holy swords, is being overwritten by the great goddess's world of emptiness. Knocking away a few spider limbs, Rizelia risked a glance at the sky. The rip in space had greatly expanded, and gigantic void arms were emerging. They're massive. Are they void lords? Rizelia's crimson eyes clouded over with despair. If they got through, the capital was done for. Oh, can you really afford to be distracted? Iris opened her mouth and spat sticky threads. The strands of shining mana bound Rizelia's limbs at once, rendering her motionless and pulling her to the ground. KHH. Rizelia released magical power, hoping to blow the threads away. Yet, why, my mana, it's... The strands only tightened, tearing into the young woman's slender throat. Hey, now, be honest with me, girl. Who gave you the dress? Iris pressed one of her arachnid legs against Rizelia's cheek. I'll never tell you. Rizelia answered through gritted teeth. My, that's a shame. Hey, you bad girl. In that case. Iris's red eyes glinted ominously. I'll play with you in my nest until you scream and beg for mercy. Lady Celia, Regina whispered. She turned back to look. Even from afar, she felt the intermittent explosions in her eardrums. That apostrophe s. Far enough, Chatters gasped. Put me down. Here. Regina gently lay Chatters's body at the foot of a crumbled building. I'll go get a first aid kit. Regina pulled up a map of the area on her terminal, looking for any place with medical supplies. Fortunately, there was a stand nearby. Regina wasn't sure if places like that were stocked on the incomplete 8th Assault Garden, but it was worth the attempt. By some miracle, she did locate emergency treatment materials and hurried back to Chatters. A puddle of dark red had formed under the princess in Regina's absence. Your Highness, I'll handle your wounds now. Let me know if it hurts. I am a knight of householdries. Such pain is nothing. Don't strain yourself, Regina said, quickly wrapping a bandage over Chatters's wrist. Administering medical aid was one of the first things Excalibur Academy students learned. Since holy swords with healing powers were rare, knowing how to treat wounds on the front lines was paramount for a holy swordsman. Regina transmitted an emergency request for assistance, but the stampede made it unlikely that the message would get through. What a disaster, to think an anti-imperial organization infiltrated the human church. Were they disciples of the apocalyptic cult? What were they? Your Highness, please, relax. You'll open your wounds, Regina said, holding the other girl's shoulders. This is pathetic, and I call myself royalty. The strongest knight? My holy sword is meant to defend the people, yet at times like these, Excuse me, Your Highness, Regina whispered before gently wrapping her hands around Chatters's back in an embrace. The princess's eyes went wide. Princess Chatters. Every holy swordsman out there looks up to you. You'll go on to lead us all someday. Please, don't say such hopeless things. The entire empire is waiting for your safe return. You talk like you know what it's like to be in my position. I apologize if I came across as presumptuous. I'm simply worried for you, Your Highness. Regina released Chatters, a lonely smile on her face. How could I not worry about my big sister? Crack, 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 crack. Fissures carved themselves into the space surrounding the two voids. Regina stood immediately to protect Chatters. The drag striker clutched in her hands. Forget about me. Regina Mercedes. Run for safety. Bang. Regina fired at one of the voids. I refuse. I'll protect you to my last. Your Highness. Crack, 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 crack. The tears continued expanding, with more fly-like voids spilling out of them. I might have trouble against so many. Regina felt a cold sweat run down the back of her neck. She knew it was beyond her to fend off this many alone. The voids swarmed at her, a loud buzzing overtaking all other sounds. Just as it seemed hopeless, lightning flashed, and all the voids rushing toward her fell lifelessly to the ground. Regina saw a familiar white garb flap softly in the corner of her eye. I see you need some help, Miss Regina. Secure, the Everdark Queen, Rakshasa Nightmare, was a devil who reigned over the afterlife. And she was the undead king's third minion. Long had she been sealed in the realm shadows, She was a match for a Dark Lord when her powers were at their full might. Because she took any chance to rebel against Leonis, he'd locked her away. So while she was his minion, she was also an uncontrollable element. She was, in a sense, Leonis's ultimate weapon. Calling upon her was strictly a last resort. Shari stood surrounded by voids. Having removed her maid's headdress, the assassin maid closed her eyes and spoke the words that would break the seal. First seal released, the lock on the realm of shadows has opened. A small whirlwind whipped up around her, causing her skirt to billow. Second seal released, unleash living death upon this place. The shadow at Shari's feet spread wide, covering the entire rooftop. Third seal released, sovereign of the eternal Ebon, may your wrath, may your lamentations, fill my hollow vessel. The shadows consumed Shari's body. And the third minion appeared. The personality of Shari Shadow Assassin was wiped away, and in its place emerged the Everdok Queen. Her body was clad in an ominous dress, as black as a lightless night. Her hands gripped the hilt of the executioner's sword. Granter of merciful death, Leonis had given Shari, the guardswoman of the realm of shadows, permission to draw the Everdok Queen into her body. That was the only thing keeping this dangerous entity under control. With Shari's body as her container, the devil's soul was bound and restrained. Deathly miasma came off her, covering the area. She floated in midair, opening her eyes soundlessly. Their dusk color gave way to a shade of ominous darkness as she beheld the voids below. Bothersome insects, she whispered. Leave my sight at once. She gently swung the executioner's sword with a single hand, and the swarm of voids was silently eradicated. Is the despicable undead king not here? Did he flee in fear of me? The devil wondered in Shari's voice. She looked around, her attention settling on the gigantic voids emerging from the tear in the sky. I suppose that could prove to be entertaining. Argue. The spider threads dug into Rhyselia's limbs and neck. As an undead, Rhyselia didn't need to breathe. However, she writhed in agony regardless, for the strands were draining her mana. This is. She manipulated her blood blades in an attempt to cut her way out, but the mana-empowered web refused to budge. Don't bother. I am a spider queen, one of the highest ranks of undead. A lowly undead like you lacks the strength to escape my threads. Iris Void Priestess let out a resounding laugh. Rhyselia's mana dwindled, and her consciousness flickered. Rhyselia mustered the last of her strength, throwing a blood blade at Iris. Yet before it could reach her mark, the liquid razor lost its shape and splashed upon the ground harmlessly. Hey, looks like your mana has run out already. With her magic power depleted, the true ancestor's dress began to fade. Leo, although her mind tumbled into the dark, Leonis's face managed to surface. This woman, this monster, was an enemy of humanity who'd summoned voids to the city. In all likelihood, she was one of Leonis's foes as well. Much like that priest, Nefakes. If Rhyselia were to fall captive now, Iris would reach her memories and discovered the truth about Leonis. Leo's going to be exposed because of me. It was then that Rhyselia recalled, despite her muddled awareness, how she'd learned to control her mana before the Holy Sword Dance Festival. Shari had trained her to circulate the power while maintaining the true ancestor's dress instead of outputting it. At the time, she hadn't quite understood what it meant to do so. Can I suppress the mana she's trying to steal, instead of just emitting it? It couldn't accomplish more than stall for time, but Rhyselia focused on her heartbeat, pulling in the magical energy her body emitted. Oh? Iris had evidently recognized some subtle change in Rhyselia and regarded her curiously. All out of mana already? That was unexpectedly disappointing. Keep the mana inside my body. As hot as a furnace. Suddenly, the true ancestor's dress changed. Its color turned from blood red to a shining, pure white. What? Iris's eyes widened in alarm. Rhyselia was surprised, too. Not just with the garment's transformation, but with the way the mana circulating through her body seemed to swell and overflow. Is my mana being amplified? Where had this new energy come from? With this much strength? Rhyselia breathed in. Hi-ah. She unleashed all the power running through her at once. Bright light spilled from her body, severing all the threads binding her limbs and neck. I am possible. A low-ranking undead tore up my web. Rhyselia landed on the ground, her white dress billowing. The mana she unleashed was being reincorporated back into her body. Is this the power of the dress Leo gave me? Rizelia could tell intuitively that this was the second form of the true ancestor's dress, another mode that formed a pair with the crimson one that consumed mana to reinforce her body. It bolsters the magic power in my body by compressing it. It's a mode specialized for spell-based combat. Rizelia's physical abilities had returned to what they were without the dress, but the sorcerer's power within her was growing mighty. So that training was to help me master this mode. Raising her holy sword, Rizelia glared at the panicking Spider Queen. This woman had summoned voids. She had to be taken alive for information. I, Rizelia Crystalia, in my capacity as captain of the 18th platoon, am placing you under arrest. Hey, you think you can talk down to me, you low-grade undead girl? Iris began a chant. Rise forth from defiled soil, you wandering cadavers, create undead army. Several dozen magic circles formed around her, and skeleton soldiers appeared from within them. She summoned skeletons just like Leo. The newly created warriors rattled as they charged Rizelia, weapons ready to strike. Come forth, Shadow Wolf summon. Rizelia chanted a spell, holding the bloody sword overhead. The darkness at her feet warped and changed form, becoming 8 ferocious beasts. Wow, I could only manifest 2 last time. The Shadow Wolves sprinted silently, lunging at the undead army. Great Lord of the Undead, beckon flames of darkness to my hands, Rizelia intoned, performing a complicated gesture with one of her hands. A sphere of black, crackling mana manifested at her fingertips. This was a second-order spell taught to her by the Archmage Nephizgal, the Cursed Flash, Defaga. It was the most destructive spell in Rizelia's arsenal. My, you wish to challenge a Dark Priestess with such weak sorcery? The Spider Queen sneered. She lifted her spider legs. Great Lord of the Undead, grant my enemy death and eternal ruination. A large orb appeared over Iris's head. A 6th-order spell, Varazfaga, a more advanced version of Defaga and an offensive spell of the highest caliber. Let that great man's spell blow you to bits, Joe. Rizelia had no chance of winning a clash with a spell far superior to hers, yet she remained undaunted, fixing her eyes upon Iris and continuing to recite spells. Defaga, 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 Defaga. Rizelia produced several dozen mana spheres. What? Defaga, 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 Defaga. Each time Rizelia spoke the words, her white true ancestor's dress glowed brightly. She wasn't capable of magic above 2nd order yet, but with this vast amount of newfound mana, she could launch a bombardment of lesser spells. You low-grade undead brat! Iris howled. Just as Rizelia loosed her Defaga volley, Iris completed her spell, hurling the massive sphere of mana. Boom! The Varazfaga's force was dampened by the many Defagas, and it ruptured in the center of the square. The skeleton soldiers and shadow wolves were caught in the blast and blown away. I'm not finished yet. Rizelia began chanting again. Each time the magic power circulated through her body, it was compressed, empowering her spells several times beyond their original strength. However, the true ancestor's dress's sorcery combat mode had a major flaw. Cycling that energy put tremendous strain on Rizelia's body. It operated differently from the Crimson version, which reinforced physical attributes, making it ill-suited to prolonged fighting. I can see why she forced me to take basic stamina training. Rizelia pushed her power further, ignoring the pain. Very well, then I shall teach you the power of a higher-ranking undead. Iris Void Priestess tore off her spider legs and threw them into the air. Take this sacrifice of my flesh, and grant forbidden power unto me. The limbs burst into flames and turned into an incandescent fireball. 8th order fire spell, Algubelzilga. The burning sphere swelled to a size that dwarfed the Varazfaga from earlier. I can't block this. Rizelia reflexively hurled the Defaga spells she cast in rapid succession. Ah ha ha ha, don't even bother, it's useless. The crimson fireball effortlessly swallowed Ryselia's magic attacks. Burst, Faga. Boom. The explosion didn't manage to reach Ryzelia. She felt an odd sense of weightlessness, as though gravity no longer applied to her. When she dared to open her eyes, Ryzelia found herself in his arms. He looked right at her, the boy she'd longed to see. "I'm sorry I kept you waiting, Miss Celia." Afterward, "Hello, this is Yushimizu. Thank you for being so patient." Volume 8 of the Demon Sword Master of Excalibur Academy is here for your reading pleasure. Leones and his fellow Dark Lords are thrown into another world by the devil of the underworld, while the Holy Sword Dance Festival begins in the capital. The Apostles plot to enact the Void Shift. Can Leones return to Ryselia's side in time? Leones was separated from Ryzelia and the others in this book, so expect lots of spoiled big sisterly affection in the next one. I'm very excited to announce that because of your fervent support, good readers, Excalibur Academy is slated for an anime adaptation. Production is already in progress. Woohoo! We have an outstanding staff lineup, from the director to the scriptwriters. I hope you're looking forward to it. Now, for some thanks, to Asagi Tosaka. Thank you for your wonderful illustrations. Ryzelia is so gorgeous on the cover that I can only sigh in admiration. To Asuka Kajin, congratulations on the 4th manga volume's publication. It's a truly high-quality adaptation, and I eagerly anticipate reading each chapter. And lastly, the biggest thank you goes to the readers. I'll see you all in Volume 9, and check out the anime when it releases. Yushimizu, September 2021.